Chapter 872. Suspicious. I turned to look at Nangong, only to find that he had already left and was now standing next to the Laozan Mountain sect leader, unsure of what to do. After a moment of thought, I followed him. When I heard that Nangong had given the Laozan Mountain sect leader half of the Nuwa stone, I was furious, but now that I had calmed down, I realized that something was wrong. The mountain and sea realm was about to open, and when it did, the 10 divine items might not even exist. What was the point of the Laozan Mountain sect leader fighting for the Nuwa stone now? In that case, my previous worries were pointless. Now that there were 11 owners of the divine items, I needed to think about whether or not they would affect the opening of the mountain and sea realm. Before I walked to Nangong's side, the Laozan sect leader moved and instantly appeared next to Han Wennan. He said bluntly, "Junior, hand over the Nuwa stone." This was completely unexpected. Everyone else frowned, unsure of what the Laozan Mountain sect leader was trying to do. Although I wanted to help Han Wennan, I didn't understand the situation, so I didn't want to get involved. I stood off to the side and watched the situation unfold. When Han Wennan heard the Laozan Mountain sect leader's words, he looked surprised. After a few seconds, he seemed to understand something. He clasped his hands toward the Laozan Mountain sect leader and said, "I don't know what senior means, but I obtained the Nuwa stone by chance. I needed to open the realm of immortals. Please forgive me for not being able to comply." From what he said, it seemed that he was prepared to sacrifice himself in order to open the mountain and sea realm. If he took the Nuwa stone out before the realm opened, he would die, and his sacrifice would be meaningless. Furthermore, he represented the entire Han clan, and the interests of the Metaphysic Society were at stake. How could he hand over the Nuwa stone so easily? Unexpectedly, the sect leader smiled and said, "You're too weak. Even if the realm of immortals opens, you won't be able to keep your life. Why don't you hand over the Nuwa stone to me? Once I find some immortal destiny, I will help you rebuild your fleshly body." To tell the truth, the sect leader's words were full of temptation. However, I heard some clues from his words. Since the Nuwa stone would die, once it left the body, it would die. Even if the sect leader acquired the complete Nuwa stone, when the mountain and sea realm opened, the Nuwa stone would leave his body, and he would inevitably die. How could he possibly pursue immortal destiny? At this time, Nangong, who was next to me, seemed to have seen through my thoughts. He said in a low voice, "Once you advance to the Yang spirit realm, even if you die, you can rely on your own cultivation to prevent your body from rotting. You can even ensure that your 3 souls do not leave your body. Your behavior will be no different from that of an ordinary person. However, this state can only last for a few months." Nangong's words were truly frightening. I had never heard of this before, not even in the death scripture. However, according to Nangong's temperament, he shouldn't be speaking carelessly. When he spoke, Nangong did not intentionally conceal his words. Everyone present heard him clearly. Old Guild Master Li was already half a step into the Xiaoyu realm, so this was nothing new to him. However, after Han Wennan heard this, his face turned gloomy. Occasionally, he would raise his head to look at old President Li, who was beside him, but old President Li ignored him. From the looks of it, President Li was taking a wait-and-see attitude towards this matter. Regarding this matter, I was naturally biased towards Han Wennan's side. However, the current situation was not clear, so it was not the time to take sides. However, in the current situation, if Han Wennan did not agree to the Laozan sect master's request, there would probably be a fight. Since President Li had such an attitude, it was obvious that he would not interfere in this matter. Han Wennan seemed to have realized this as well. However, as the clan master of the Han clan, if he were to hand over the Nuwa stone so easily, wouldn't it mean that the Han clan was at the mercy of others? However, Han Wennan clearly knew that if they really fought, without the help of outsiders, he would definitely not be a match for the Laozan sect master. Therefore, although he was angry, he did not rush to explode. Instead, he asked, "Since Senior has already advanced to the Xiaoyu realm, you won't be afraid of losing your physical body. Why don't you hand over the other half of the Nuwa stone to me? That way, I can fulfill my wish. Not only will I not hinder Senior from seeking immortal fate, but it will also allow Senior to gain a benevolent reputation. Why not? He was a smart person to actually say such words. What he said was indeed reasonable. It would be good for both him and the Laozhan sect master. However, although this is the first time I have met the Laozhan sect master, I have roughly figured out his personality after talking with him at Laozhan sect. Logically speaking, he was not an unreasonable person. In fact, he could even be said to be very open-minded. Since he came to ask for the Nuwa stone today, it must not only be about the immortal fate. After hearing Han Wen'an's words, the Laozhan sect master's expression did not change at all. He replied, "It seems that you, a junior, still don't know the secret of this godly weapon. Let me tell you, after the world of immortals opens, the person who is recognized by the godly weapon will have the opportunity to obtain the power of the godly weapon and ascend. If not, I will not mind giving you the Nuwa stone." Hearing those words, everyone was shocked. However, only old guild leader Li and Nangong remained calm. Based on the position and strength of the Laozhan sect master, it was obvious that he was unable to reach this level. It was very likely that he found out about this from Nangong. However, the matter of the godly weapon goes back a long time. Nangong has the Kunlun mirror, which allows him to pry into the mysteries of heaven. It is normal for him to know about this. However, the fact that President Li also knows about this makes me a bit puzzled. In that case, after the mountain and sea realm opens, the 11 of us will have the opportunity to obtain the immortal fate. If Han Wen'an did as he said, and the Laozhan sect master gave a Nuwa stone to Han Wen'an to fulfill his wish, then in the end, the sect master would lose this opportunity. As for Han Wen'an, he would die and the opportunity would be wasted. The pros and cons of this can be easily seen by anyone with a discerning eye. Now that things have come to this, I am unable to weigh the pros and cons. On one hand, Han Wen'an and I are close friends, so I should help him out. On the other hand, although the Laozhan sect master has nothing to do with me, he and Nangong have some plans that may affect the future of the witch tribe. Logically speaking, I should not interfere. After thinking for a while, the Laozhan sect master spoke again. As the Laozhan sect master, I have to consider the orthodox Taoism. At present, the witch tribe has 6 divine items, the metaphysical society has 3, and the Tantric Buddhism sect has 1. Only my Taoism does not have a divine item. Although the opening of the world of immortals is inevitable, it does not seem to benefit my Taoism in the slightest. How can this be? With that, the Laozhan sect master turned to Celestial Master Zhang and cupped his hands. I don't know if Celestial Master Zhang only learned of the secret of the divine item today. If he knew long ago, then Mount Longhu does not mind the matter of the immortal fate, and I will not be noisy. If not, I hope that Celestial Master Zhang will consider the orthodox Taoism. When the Laozhan sect master mentioned the secret of the divine artifact, I paid special attention to Celestial Master Zhang's reaction. He clearly didn't know anything about this. This was also one of the reasons why I couldn't figure out old President Li. If it was for personal interests, then no one would interfere in the fight for the Nuwa stone. That was why Celestial Master Zhang and President Li did not say anything earlier. However, the Laozhan sect master's words had elevated this matter to the interests of the entire Taoism. Although I did not know whether it was true or not, as long as there was a chance, as the representative of the orthodox Taoism, Celestial Master Zhang would fight for his juniors. It was obvious that Celestial Master Zhang and President Li had a close relationship. However, after this matter, it was inevitable that there would be a gap between them. Thinking of this, I suddenly had a thought. Could it be that Nangong's real intention was not the immortal fate, but to cause discord between the metaphysical society and Taoism? After the matter of the mountain and sea realm, even if the 2 sects wanted to exterminate the witch tribe, they would not be able to act as they did in the past. Nangong's method was indeed brilliant. After listening to the Laozhan sect master's words, Celestial Master Zhang seemed to have made a decision. He walked towards us. After a few seconds, he stood in front of President Li and asked softly, "I won't ask why you didn't tell me about this before. Now that I know, I have no choice but to ask for it from you." Then the Penglai sect master, who had been standing in the metaphysical society, walked over. He cupped his hands towards President Li and Celestial Master Zhang. I used to practice rituals in the Dragon Gate Monastery, so I can be considered a Taoist. Since this matter concerns the interests of the juniors of Taoism, I have to fight for them. I hope that you will be generous. Now that the Penglai sect master had stepped forward, President Li would not remain indifferent. He must have weighed the pros and cons. Furthermore, if this matter was delayed, it might delay the opening of the mountain and sea realm. In less than a few seconds, President Li revealed a smile on his face and said to the two old men in front of him, "This old man is getting on in years, so I have neglected this matter. Since Celestial Master and Old Shun have stepped forward, I will agree to this matter." After that, he turned to look at Han Wennan, who was beside him, and signaled him to take out the half of the Nuwa stone. Facing an existence like President Li, Han Wennan was clearly afraid. However, he was the patriarch of the Han family, and this matter concerned his life. As long as there was a glimmer of hope, he would fight for it. After a while, Han Wennan suddenly got down on one knee and cupped his hands towards the three old men. The matter of the Nuwa stone concerns not only my life, but also the prosperity of the Han family. I hope that seniors will give me a chance. Even now, Han Wennan still persisted. Seeing this, I couldn't help but sigh. Chapter 873. Old President Li's expression didn't change when he saw Han Wennan kneeling down to beg for mercy. After a short while, he frowned and revealed a dignified expression. His attitude was obvious. If Han Wennan didn't follow his orders, he would die in the next second. Han Wennan was still kneeling on the ground, begging for mercy. However, my heart was filled with rage. The world of metaphysics had always been a world of cannibalism. Whoever was stronger had the right to speak, while the weak didn't have the right to speak. I understood that, but I felt that it wasn't worth it for Han Wennan. He and Lu Jinyang were both elites of the younger generation in the metaphysics world. However, as compared to Lu Jinyang, he was much more loyal to the Metaphysics Association. Many times, even if it was against his will, he would still carry out the Metaphysics Association's orders, just like how he had attacked me previously. On the other hand, Lu Jinyang had targeted me at the Young Phoenix gathering to casually kill the people in the metaphysics world. He had always cared about himself and didn't care about others. But what happened to them in the end? If it wasn't for the restriction on Lu Jinyang's body that forced him to submit to me, the Metaphysics Association would still treat him like a treasure. Han Wennan, on the other hand, had easily become a sacrifice for the Metaphysics Association. I smiled coldly and walked out. Standing in front of Han Wennan, I said to old President Li in a clear voice, "We are all from the same family, and Han Wennan is a dragon among men." Old President's actions are somewhat neglecting the essentials. Before the old president could reply, Han Wennan, who was behind me, pressed down on my shoulder. "Zhou, you mustn't participate in this matter." I turned to look at him. If I didn't participate in this matter, other than death, what other option did he have? Han Wennan seemed to see through my thoughts and sighed before continuing, "My life was picked up from the ground. Now that the wind and clouds are gathering, our Han family is just a flying insect in the middle of it. Even if we want to protect ourselves, we have to look at other people's faces. So, I can only beg but not fight for it." After hearing his words, I felt even more annoyed. I raised my voice and asked loudly, "What if you don't get it?" "Don't get it?" Han Wennan's voice was extremely calm. "If you don't get it, you can only die." Looking at Han Wennan's calm expression, I felt extremely annoyed, but I also calmed down. If it was me, I definitely wouldn't accept such an outcome. However, Han Wennan was different from me. He had too many things to worry about. It was impossible for him to be as casual as me. What is there to be said about seeking benevolence and obtaining it? After a moment of silence, I nodded my head and no longer thought about what had just happened. I solemnly told Han Wennan that if I could obtain an immortal fate this time, I would use an immortal's method to help him reconstruct his physical body on the day of his ascension. Han Wennan nodded slightly and smiled. He didn't say anything else, but slowly stood up and walked toward the Han family. He must have something to say. Old President Li and the others could tell that Han Wen had already made up his mind, so they did not rush him. Seeing this, none of us disturbed Han Wen. After about a quarter of an hour, he walked out from the crowd. At this moment, he was in a very relaxed state. It seemed that he had settled everything. He was going to die here today, so he probably didn't have much burden in his heart. It was just that he had brought forward the time. Han Wen walked in front of me and cupped his fists. Zhou Yi, I'm not a good talker. I don't know how to thank you for today's matter. If I, Han Wen, can see the light of day again, I will definitely drink with you. After saying that, he didn't wait for me to reply. He suddenly took back his hands and dug into his chest. At the same time, the juniors of the Han family knelt on the ground and cried out in pain. Master! Along with this voice, blood splashed out from Han Wen's chest. After a series of wails, his pupils dilated and his body trembled violently. After a series of convulsions, he pulled his hands out of his chest with difficulty, holding half of the Nuwa stone. It seemed that he was going to hand it to me. However, he had only raised it less than 10 centimeters when the corner of his mouth twitched. His hands fell and his body fell backward. Seeing this, I immediately went forward to support his body to prevent it from falling from the clouds and sinking to the bottom of the sea. At this moment, Han Wen's pupils were dilated and there was no vitality in his face. I couldn't help but sigh in my heart, feeling extremely annoyed. Previously, Han Wen's cultivation base was at the later stage of the Seal realm. With the nourishment of half of the Nuwa stone in his body, his current cultivation base was infinitely close to the Yang spirit. If he had the Yang spirit cultivation base at this time, after his body died, it would be possible to preserve the Yang spirit. However, it was just a little bit short. At this time, a person from the Han family walked out. His face was a little familiar. He seemed to be Uncle Han Wen, who I had met in the past. Things were different now. After receiving Han Wen's body from me, he slightly bowed to me and then left with Han Wen's body. Before leaving, he pried open Han Wen's hands and gave me the blood-stained half of the Nuwa stone. The originally colorful Nuwa stone was now wrapped in a layer of blood, leaving only the color of blood. After receiving the Nuwa stone, I expressionlessly handed it to the Laozhan mountain hierarch. Then, I returned to Nangong's side. Han Wen was already dead, so it was meaningless to ask Nangong. Thus, I didn't say anything and just stood there in silence. At the same time, the Han family left after receiving Han Wen's body. After this incident, the Han family didn't have much meaning to the Metaphysics Association. It wasn't suitable for them to stay here. It was better to leave as soon as possible. After the Han family left, the Laozhan mountain hierarch took out the other half of the Nuwa stone from his chest. He looked very relaxed and didn't look like he was in danger. After he took out the other half of the Nuwa stone, the other half of the Nuwa stone immediately moved forward. The two pieces of a Nuwa stone closed the gap. In an instant, a burst of multicolored light flashed, and the surrounding clouds were reflected in a gorgeous multicolored light. After a few seconds, the light disappeared into the Nuwa stone. Only a small area of colorful light was left twinkling around. Seeing the Laozhan mountain hierarch take out the Nuwa stone, the others who were in charge of the divine weapons also took out the divine weapons and placed them in front of their chests. Soon, the divine weapons seemed to sense something. They buzzed and flew away. After the 10 divine weapons flew dozens of meters away, they stopped and hovered above people's heads. In the next second, a beam of golden light shot out from each of the divine weapons and headed toward the hazy mist in the Immortal Mountain. The golden light seemed to have some kind of energy. When it touched the mist, it made a muffled sound as if it was knocking on a door. When the last ray of golden light struck the mist, an object slowly appeared in the hazy nothingness. After a few seconds, the thing was completely revealed to everyone. It was a white stone door. When I saw the white stone door, I frowned. I felt a sense of familiarity, as if I had seen it somewhere before. After a while, I remembered that I had seen a mural in the Shang Dynasty's mausoleum. In the last mural, there was a white stone door. At that time, I thought it was strange that the person with the sword pointed at the stone door looked exactly like me. Later, After experiencing many things, I vaguely understood that the person was Emperor Ku, and the sword in his hand was the Xin Yuan sword. Emperor Ku had wanted to open the mountain and sea realm to kill the monster Emperor Jun, but the monster Emperor Jun had already escaped. Emperor Ku couldn't open the mountain and sea realm either. In the end, the two of them died together. In that case, the stone door in the mural was the door to the mountain and sea realm. Now, as long as the stone door was opened, the mountain and sea realm would be completely open. Just as I was lost in thought, Nangong waved his hand and called Yi Pianpian over. Seeing this, old President Li and Celestial Master Zhang turned their heads at the same time and called Yi Pianpian and another woman who looked exactly like her. When I saw Yi Pianpian, I couldn't help but feel nervous. She was one of the keys to the door, something I had known for a long time. But even now, I was still worried. I didn't know what would happen once the door was opened. Unlike my worries, Yi Pianpian and the others looked extremely calm. After the three of us walked together, Yi Pianpian even had the leisure to look back at me with a smile. At this time, Nangong took a step forward, leading Yi Pianpian and the others toward the white stone door. When they were about 20 steps in front of the stone door, the air suddenly became filled with shaman qi. Then, a golden figure suddenly appeared in front of the stone door. My eyes widened. Little Gold. What is he doing here? Ever since he left me, I haven't heard from Xiao Jin for 2 whole years. In the letter he left me before he left, he said that he had something important to do. Could it be that it's today's matter? Although Little Gold didn't say anything from his actions in front of the stone door, it was obvious that he wanted to stop the others from opening the mountain and sea realm. I was very puzzled. The Tai Sui tribe had always stood aloof from worldly affairs. Even the Tai Sui I had devoured earlier had been arranged by someone else. Little Gold appearing outside the Fire God Temple was clearly part of the plan. Logically speaking, he shouldn't be stopping the mountain and sea realm from opening. Just as I was thinking about this, Nangong, who had been walking in front of me, stopped and frowned at Little Gold. He didn't say anything for a long time. The Tai Sui was the totem of the witch tribe. As a member of the witch tribe, Nangong's heart was in turmoil when faced with such a situation. As for old President Li and Celestial Master Zhang, although they were half a step into the Sunset Realm, the power of the Tai Sui was not to be underestimated. Their faces were filled with vigilance. At this time, the evil sacrificial spirit suddenly stood up and coldly asked Little Gold, "Why are you blocking the door?" Little Gold still looked a bit childish. He shook his head and said in a low voice, "You can't open the door." The evil sacrificial spirit said, "Do you know how important this matter is? You can't stop it by yourself." Little Gold shook his head again. "I'm only responsible for guarding the door." The conversation between the two of them was extremely simple, but it sounded as if there was some hidden meaning behind it. Although I couldn't understand what they were talking about, I thought back to the Jade Buddha Temple in Thailand, where I had met the Fire Tai Sui. After learning that Little Gold had disappeared, he had said something that seemed to confirm what I was seeing. As I was thinking about this, the evil sacrificial spirit's aura suddenly rose. The anger on his face grew stronger, and he said in a low voice, "If you don't get out of the way, today will be the day you die." This time, Little Gold simply kept his mouth shut and shook his head for the 3rd time. The situation was clear. Everyone was preparing to open the door. Although Little Gold was the Tai Sui, he couldn't stop this flood of power. Seeing that he was determined, I became nervous. I was worried that the evil sacrificial spirit would attack. I hurried to stop him and said, "Everyone, don't be anxious. There is still room for discussion." Chapter 874. After throwing the question to me, the evil spirit turned and walked to the side. I took a deep breath and walked to Xiao Jin's side. I didn't know what mission Xiao Jin had. In my heart, he was just a child who didn't like to talk and knew nothing about the world. "Xiao Jin." I called out to him. Xiao Jin didn't turn to look at me, but his body moved slightly. Everyone was waiting. I didn't have much time, so I could only patiently explain the current situation to him. I also told him that no matter what reason he had, as long as he told me, we could find a way to solve this problem. However, no matter what I said, Xiao Jin didn't reply. He didn't even turn to look at me. He just stood there in silence. After 15 minutes, the people around us were obviously anxious. Even the old president and celestial teacher Zhang frowned and looked over. In the end, the evil spirit walked over and pulled me back. He shook his head. There's no turning back. You should go back. I wasn't willing to give up. I wanted to continue fighting, but the evil spirit said, the Tai Sui race doesn't care about worldly affairs. If they make a move, it must be the decision of a race. You won't be able to persuade them, and they won't give in. Then, he didn't wait for me to say anything. He grabbed my shoulder and flew back. In the blink of an eye, we returned to our previous position. As soon as I landed, President Li, Celestial Teacher Zhang, and the King of Penglai, Old Chun, appeared in front of Xiao Jin. They looked angry. From their expressions, it seemed that they wanted to fight Xiao Jin. The evil spirit brought me back to my original position. It was obvious that he didn't want me to get involved in this matter, and he also expressed his attitude. I didn't know Xiao Jin's power, but when he had transformed into his original form, he had easily killed Yin Nanshan's sun god. It was obvious that he wasn't an ordinary person. At this moment, 3 people, half a step into the Shaoguan realm, had joined hands to deal with him. It was obvious that one of them wouldn't be able to kill Xiao Jin. My only hope was that Xiao Jin's power was so high that he could resist the 3 of them. As for opening the door, to be honest, I wasn't as excited as the others. Of course, this is only my speculation. In reality, I don't know Xiao Jin's cultivation. After a moment of silence, I asked the sacrificial evil spirit, but he shook his head. The witchcraft and Tao energies come from the Tai Sui race. With their cultivation at half a step into the Shaoju realm, they are naturally not a match for the Tai Sui. However, with the 3 of them working together, the Tai Sui has no chance of winning. Hearing that, my heart sank again. There's no chance of winning. I asked, what if he escapes? The evil sacrificial spirit turned to look at me. If he knew how to run away, why would he show himself? I kept quiet, feeling hopeless. Unlike Han Wenan just now, the old president was the only one targeting Han Wenan. I could still use my own identity to make use of Nangong and the sacrificial evil spirit as a deterrent. But now, Xiao Jin was facing almost everyone present. While I didn't know what to do, Xiao Jin looked at the 3 people approaching him. He seemed to recognize the danger. However, he was not afraid at all. Instead, his eyes were burning with the flames of battle. He raised his arms and roared at the sky. There was a sudden clap of thunder in midair. The power of thunder landed on Xiao Jin's body. In just a few seconds, Xiao Jin transformed into a golden Tai Sui. He was dozens of feet tall and had a layer of seemingly indestructible skin. Everyone exclaimed in surprise. Most of the people around had never seen the Tai Sui in their lives, so they couldn't help but be surprised. On the other hand, President Li and the other 2 were much calmer. Seeing that Xiao Jin had transformed into his original form, they didn't hesitate. They flew forward and surrounded Xiao Jin. Seeing that, Xiao Jin attacked first. He turned his head and flung the hair on his scalp at the 3 of them. This was Xiao Jin's usual technique. Many cultivators had died from his braids. The 3 of them seemed to realize the power of the braids, so they didn't take it head-on. Instead, they twisted their bodies and dodged Xiao Jin's attack. After they steadied themselves, Taoist aura appeared in their hands. The 3 Taoist auras charged at Xiao Jin's head. However, the golden light didn't attack Xiao Jin directly. Instead, it passed over his head. Several beams of golden light connected to form a golden cage. I've never seen such a method used by a person who is rushed up. I find it novel, and it does seem to be somewhat extraordinary. After the golden cage was formed, the 3 of them didn't stay idle. They sat cross-legged on the ground and formed sword fingers with their hands. They kept injecting Taoist aura into the cage. While everyone was marveling at such a technique, Xiao Jin, who was in the cage, finally made a move. Sorcery chi surged on his hands, and he slapped at the beam of light in front of him. When Xiao Jin's palm landed, the beam of light suddenly split into several strands of Taoist aura. They transformed into ropes and wrapped around Xiao Jin's wrist tightly. This situation seemed to be beyond Xiao Jin's expectations. He wanted to pull his hand out of the ropes of Taoist aura. However, when he exerted force, the ropes seemed to become tighter. At this moment, Xiao Jin's expression was somewhat gloomy, but he didn't panic. It seemed that he had a countermeasure. As soon as he thought of this, Xiao Jin's chest puffed up. He opened his mouth and spat out thousands of beams of golden light towards the ropes of Taoist aura. When the two collided, there was a crisp sound. The ropes of Taoist aura shattered. The thousands of beams of golden light didn't just attack the ropes. The surrounding beams of Taoist aura couldn't escape and shattered as well. When the surrounding people saw this, they let out cries of surprise. They were dumbfounded. They didn't expect that the technique of these three people, who were half a step into the Shaowan realm, would be so easily neutralized by Xiao Jin. This is also the first time I've seen Xiao Jin use such a technique. Its power is truly shocking. However, President Li and the others weren't surprised. Their faces became even more gloomy after their attack failed. Then, the three of them flew back to a spot. They seemed to be discussing something. After a few seconds, the three of them seemed to have reached a consensus and returned to their original positions. After Xiao Jin unleashed the attack just now, he had clearly used up a lot of energy. His chest rose and fell slightly. However, he didn't let his guard down. Instead, he stared at the movements of the three people. In the next second, Elder Chun, the master of Penglai, was the first to attack. He formed a sword with his hands, and a small silver sword flew out of his sleeves. The small sword was filled with spiritual qi. It was obviously extraordinary. Then, he glared at it and shouted, "Go!" The small silver sword in front of him instantly grew to a length of more than 10 meters and a width of several meters. On the sword, Taoist qi flowed. Even my armor remover sword, which was filled with Taoist qi, couldn't match it. After the giant's sword took shape, Elder Chen's face turned slightly pale. It was obvious that this attack was his strongest attack. In the blink of an eye, the giant's sword pierced through the air. When it pierced through the sky, a rumble was heard, followed by waves of qi. The qi waves instantly hit everyone in the face. The surrounding people were hit by the qi waves and were all sent flying. They disappeared in an instant. Fortunately, I have a powerful person like the sacrificial evil spirit with me. That's how I managed to protect the sorcerer tribe. He raised his eyes and looked at the battle. In a few seconds, the giant's sword was already above Xiao Jin's head and was about to fall. The giant's sword had such power, so Xiao Jin naturally wouldn't be careless. Immediately, his aura became stronger. His hands were wrapped in thick sorcerer qi, and he punched the giant's sword. I originally thought that the giant sword wouldn't be able to injure Xiao Jin seriously, but the two should be evenly matched. However, when the two collided, the giant sword was as fragile as glass and completely shattered. After the attack failed, Elder Chen suffered a backlash. He spat out a mouthful of blood, and his face turned even paler. There was a hint of surprise in his eyes. Xiao Jin didn't seem to be unscathed as I had expected. The flesh on his fist cracked a lot, and golden blood slowly flowed down his arm. However, it was much better than Elder Chen's. Seeing this scene, the other two people frowned and stopped what they were doing. It seemed that they didn't intend to use their respective techniques. With Xiao Jin's strength, it was enough for them to find another method. As expected, Celestial Master Zhang gave Old Guild Masterly a look, and the latter immediately understood and nodded slightly. Then, Zhang Tianshi mobilized the Taoist qi in his body. In the next second, he spat out a gust of Taoist qi that shot into the sky. A few seconds later, a black cloud appeared out of nowhere at the place where the Taoist qi had disappeared. In the blink of an eye, the bright moon in the sky suddenly produced black clouds out of nowhere. Seeing this, I understood that Zhang Tianshi had actually used the Heavenly Thunder Talisman. Thinking back to when I had just advanced to the Yang God Celestial Master, the people from Dragon Tiger Mountain used the Heavenly Thunder Talisman that was comparable to the Golden Talisman to deal with me. There were 5 bolts of Heavenly Thunder. If I hadn't learned the Sky Devouring technique at that time, I might have already died under the rolling heavenly thunder. However, although Zhang Tianshi was half a step into the Xiaoyu realm, the power of the heavenly thunder talisman that he used was not to be underestimated. There should be 6 bolts of heavenly thunder. This kind of method could be used to deal with other people, but to deal with the tyrannical Xiao Jin, it seemed that he was a little too confident, right? Just as I was slightly surprised, the power of thunder and lightning was already accumulating in the black cloud. Seeing that the first bolt of heavenly thunder was about to fall, unexpectedly, Zhang Tianshi and the other 2 people took out a drop of blood, wrapped it with the power of Taoist Qi, and sent it towards the black cloud. Seeing this, I was startled. They really did have a backup plan. With the power of the 3 people's blood to deal with Xiao Jin, it was hard to predict who would be stronger and who would be weaker. If Xiao Jin could withstand this attack, then the 3 of them wouldn't be able to do anything to him. After the heavenly thunder devoured the blood essence, a wave of pressure instantly descended upon the sorcerer tribe. Other than the sacrificial evil spirit, who could still hold on, all the other sorcerer tribesmen were pressed to the ground. Some of them even foamed at the mouth and fainted. The power of these 3 people added together was probably the power of an immortal. I originally thought that the heavenly thunder would descend one by one, but I never thought that after the black cloud rolled, it would disappear. A few seconds later, at the place where the black cloud disappeared, a thick pillar of blood-colored lightning fiercely smashed toward Xiao Jin. When Xiao Jin saw this, the pressure on him increased. He let out an angry roar and continuously hit his chest with both hands. A drop of blood flew out, trying to use the power of his blood to fight against it. Unexpectedly, the power of the lightning was too fierce. Xiao Jin's blood couldn't stop it for even a moment. After the drop of blood disappeared, the power of the lightning didn't decrease at all. From the top of Xiao Jin's head, it filled his whole body. Xiao Jin struggled with all his strength. After a loud explosion, a layer of Xiao Jin's flesh and blood splattered. A puddle of golden blood even splashed on the white stone door. In the next second, Xiao Jin lowered his head and half-knelt on the ground. His body swayed continuously above the clouds. At this moment, I couldn't bear to watch anymore. I clenched my fists and closed my eyes. However, at this moment, I suddenly heard Xiao Jin's weak voice. Chapter 875. Hearing Xiao Jin's cry, my body tensed up and I immediately stood up. My first reaction was that Xiao Jin was asking me for help. Although I knew that my power was like an ant trying to shake a tree when facing 3 people who were half a step in the Xiaoji realm, how could I ignore Xiao Jin's call for help? I didn't rush over immediately, but turned to look at the evil, sacrificial spirit. He had brought me here. If he had stopped me, I was afraid that I wouldn't have been able to walk over. Unexpectedly, the evil sacrificial spirit looked at Xiao Jin and said to me, "Go and do as he said." I didn't know what he meant, but I couldn't care too much. Hearing his permission, I immediately flew to Xiao Jin's side. Xiao Jin was lying paralyzed on the ground, his eyes blurred. It was obvious that his life was in danger. Seeing me coming over, he didn't wait for me to speak and urged, Zhou, hurry. While I'm still breathing, quickly swallow me." Hearing Xiao Jin's words, I was stunned. I didn't know what he meant. His voice was weak, and seeing my confusion, he seemed to be even more anxious. After shivering for a long time, he finally uttered a complete sentence. From his tone, it seemed that he had expected the failure of this operation, but even if he died, he couldn't delay the future. He had originally discussed this with the Tai Sui with a fire attribute. According to the original plan, Xiao Jin should be swallowed by me when I advanced to the Yang God realm, and the Tai Sui with the fire attribute would be useful in the future. However, Xiao Jin acted on his own and disrupted the plan. If I swallowed him now, I might be able to make up for it. After listening to Xiao Jin's words, I finally understood why the Tai Sui with the fire attribute in the Clear Sky Pagoda had been surprised by my cultivation. At that time, I realized that there must have been some kind of plan between the 2 of them. I didn't expect that Xiao Jin would disrupt the plan. Before coming here, the evil sacrificial spirit had signaled me to do as Xiao Jin said. It was obvious that he knew what Xiao Jin was thinking. In that case, even if Xiao Jin didn't stop me from opening the mountain and sea realm, he would still be swallowed by me in the future. Looking at Little Gold's current state, I couldn't bear to see him like this. However, this matter was too important. Even if Little Gold had to die, he had to persist. It seemed that the evil spirit had already known about this. At this moment, my wishes were meaningless. I sighed and nodded to Xiao Jin. Then, I started to circulate the sky, swallowing secret art. In just a few seconds, Wizard Chi seeped out from every pore on his body, wrapping Goldie's huge body in it. From the beginning to the end, Xiao Jin didn't make a sound until his body completely dissipated and turned into a pure witchcraft aura that surged into my body. This time, it was different from when I had advanced to the Yang God Celestial Master. After the pure power that Xiao Jin had transformed and entered my body, without any guidance, it directly surged towards my heaven veins. Almost in an instant, I entered the perfect Yang God realm, but the pure power was far from reaching its end. Under the surge of this power, my mind was already in chaos. I instinctively sat cross-legged on the ground and quickly circulated the devouring technique. After being refined by the devouring technique, the pure power gradually became docile. It flowed through every meridian in my body and finally flowed into my heaven veins. However, Little Gold's witchcraft aura was too strong. My heaven veins couldn't store it all. Now that the jade bracelet had disappeared, I didn't know how to store the remaining witchcraft aura. While I was at a loss, the evil spirit's voice suddenly came to my head. "This is the best time to advance. Don't panic. I'll protect you." Hearing this, I was confused. The evil spirit had said that this was the best time to advance, but I knew the situation in my body. Although my witchcraft aura was very strong, my Taoist aura wasn't saturated. It couldn't withstand the consumption of the Yang God advancement. Thinking about this, I told the evil spirit about it and asked what I should do. After listening to me, he didn't explain but said, "You just need to urge your Yang God. Don't worry about what will happen next." Although I didn't understand the evil, sacrificial spirit's words, I had complete trust in him. Then, I sent my spiritual sense into my life palace. The witchcraft aura and Taoist aura in my heaven veins were continuously sent to my Yang God. I didn't stop until the energy in my heaven veins was exhausted. Unexpectedly, before I could even catch my breath, the pure shaman chi that was originally lingering in my meridians actually forcefully charged at every acupuncture point, and it seemed to have the intention of breaking out of my body. The pain that followed caused me to be unable to help but let out a low howl. I didn't have any strength left in my body, so I couldn't stop the witchcraft aura from attacking me. While I was in so much pain that I wanted to die, the witchcraft aura suddenly calmed down and flowed toward the Yang God in my life palace. After the witchcraft aura had all left, I felt better. The next second, the Yang God that was sitting cross-legged emitted golden light and dark green light. After a while, the two colors appeared at the same time, dividing the Yang God into two different forms. Not only that, but the fist-sized Yang God was also rapidly expanding, squeezing my life palace. My head buzzed as if it was about to explode. In just a few seconds, the Yang God had completely occupied my life palace. In a trance, I found that the Yang God's appearance was the same as the Fox King's, and the mark on the Yang God's forehead was becoming more obvious. Seeing this, I realized that when my life was hanging by a thread, the Yang God might have awakened the Fox King's power and saved my life. While I was thinking, the Yang God exploded and broke my life palace. Then there was only a buzzing sound in my head, and my eyes became blurry. In the chaos, I felt that my Yang God had left my body. In a trance, my consciousness seemed to have come out of my body. I could clearly see myself sitting cross-legged on the ground, and I also saw the surprised crowd around me. The evil spirit was standing in front of me. At that moment, there was a sudden clap of thunder. Under the starry sky, there was a dazzling light that shrouded my body. I felt that my young god was in the light, rotating around my body. Every time it rotated, the young god's energy became stronger. After about a quarter of an hour, the young god became dazzling, and it was particularly eye-catching under the night sky. The people around me were shocked. Even I didn't care about the feeling of exhaustion in my body to take a few more glances at it. In the next moment, the young god swooped down from the sky. I was startled. I didn't know what was going on. Before I could react, the yang spirit had already crashed into my body. After receiving the attack, my head felt heavy, and I fainted. When I woke up again, I opened my eyes. I was still sitting in the same place, and the people around me were still watching. The evil spirit was still standing in front of me. At that moment, my head was still in chaos. I sat in a daze, not knowing what to do. At that moment, the evil spirit's voice came again. He asked me to look inside to see if there was anything different in my body. Subconsciously, I listened to the evil spirit's words. I closed my eyes and looked inside. My head gradually became clearer. I found that my heavenly veins were still full of energy, and every acupuncture point was fully opened. Not only that, but there was also a pure energy in my body. Through this energy, I seemed to be able to sense the spirits of all things in the world. However, my life palace was hazy, and I couldn't feel the existence of the young god. After realizing this, I felt a little anxious. When I was unconscious, I clearly remembered that my life palace had been broken, and the young god had left my body and returned. Why was my life palace intact, but the young god was gone? While I was thinking, a golden light flashed in my life palace, dispelling the haze. At that moment, the figure of the young god appeared. However, the young god had completely transformed into the appearance of the Fox King. It was stepping on the spirits of all things, and its body was overflowing with golden light. There was also a halo above its head, making it look like an immortal. After that, the spiritual energy in my body was full, and I felt comfortable for a while, but I also felt a little uncomfortable. Seeing such a situation, it was as if I had a sudden inspiration. I instantly understood that I should have already advanced to the Rush realm. According to the death scripture, after the young god advanced to the next stage, it would be able to travel thousands of miles in a flash. It would appear and disappear, and it would have the ability to reach the heavens and the earth. It was exactly the same as what I was feeling at the moment. After understanding this, I finally relaxed and opened my eyes. However, at that moment, I heard cries of surprise from all around me. I looked around and found that everyone's eyes were focused on me. It seemed that there was something strange about my body. After I looked at myself, I found that my body was wrapped in a layer of faint golden light, which was exactly the same as the young god in my life palace. I was startled, but I immediately understood. It was because I had just advanced and the spiritual energy in my body was unstable, which led to the appearance of my dharma. I took a deep breath and gradually stabilized the spiritual energy in my body. Only then did I return to normal. I looked at the crowd again. I didn't know if it was because I was in a higher position, but when I looked at the crowd, I felt as if I was looking down on all living beings. After hesitating for a moment, I understood. Perhaps after advancing to the next stage, my temperament had changed. After reaching the young god advancement stage, one could be said to be standing at the peak of the world. They were only one step away from ascending to the heavens and becoming a true immortal. After reaching this realm, I finally understood why people like the old president and Celestial Master Zhang were always elusive. No matter where they stood, they gave off a feeling of transcendence. It wasn't that they deliberately distanced themselves from the world, but because of their cultivation, they had already distanced themselves from the world. As I thought about this, I turned to look in the direction where Xiao Jin had disappeared. It was empty, and there was no trace of him. Xiao Jin had disappeared, or rather, he had become a part of me. I still didn't know what kind of responsibility he had shouldered, but there was no doubt that after he had become a part of me, the things he had shouldered had also been transferred to me. No matter what the reason was, I didn't have any reason to stop. Whether it was active or passive, I still had to walk this path. After a long moment of silence, I turned to look at the evil sacrificial spirit. I didn't say anything and just returned to my previous position. As soon as I stood still, Yao Yao, who wasn't far from me, sent me a voice transmission. She anxiously asked, "Big Brother Zhou, just now, why did your Yang God look like the Fox King?" The Yang God is the Dharma idol of the main body. How did that happen? After hearing her question, I was startled. Then, I remembered that I had said that I was the Fox King's divine emissary. In reality, there was no Fox King's divine emissary. I was the monster Emperor June. After a moment of silence, I didn't know how to explain it to her. I could only send her a voice transmission. Wait until the mountain and sea realm opens. You will know. After hearing my explanation, Yao Yao didn't ask any more questions, but her expression was still somewhat bewildered. Now that Xiao Jin had finished guarding the gate, Celestial Master Zhang and the old president were somewhat anxious. They urged Yi Pianpian and the others to go to the stone gate. Chapter 876. He was still waiting for someone? First it was the Laozan Mountain sect leader, and now he was waiting for someone else. However, I had seen enough of Nangong's mysteriousness, so I wasn't surprised. If he wanted to wait, then he would wait. After all, he was the one in charge of opening the mountain and sea realm. I didn't have any objections. President Li and Celestial Master Zhang seemed to be on the same side as Nangong. Although they had been a bit impatient earlier, they restrained their subordinates and waited quietly. Not long after, a flash of red appeared in the sky. Someone really was coming. When the person landed on the ground, I opened my eyes wide. The person who had just arrived was Bayan. Wasn't she unable to leave the Fire God Temple? How did she come here? Did Nangong arrange it? Many suspicions surged in my mind. I didn't have the time to ask Nangong about it. I lifted my foot and prepared to walk towards Lao Ai. But before I could understand, Lao Ai gracefully walked in front of me and warmly called out, "Husband." I was still in a state of shock and didn't say anything. Next to me, Nangong said, "We were just waiting for you." Hearing Nangong's words, I came back to my senses. I turned to him and shouted, "What do you mean?" I was inexplicably angry. Clearly, Nangong had planned for Swan and I to come here, but he had never discussed it with me. He hadn't even informed me. I didn't wait for Nangong's reply. Instead, Swan and I took over and said in a soft voice, "Husband, don't be angry. It wasn't his fault. It was my own will." Her own will? I didn't know what Swan and I meant, but hearing her words, the corners of my eyes twitched. I felt very uneasy. After a moment of silence, I asked Swan and I how she had escaped from the Fire God Temple. Swanee's expression was calm. She looked up at me, a faint smile on her lips. When she heard my question, she explained that not long ago, Shang-Chi had used her own flesh and blood and a secret technique to forcefully break the Fire God Temple's restrictions. She had then escaped. Shang-Chi was dead? I frowned slightly. The last time I returned to the Fire God Temple, I had asked him about the true dragon bone. When I left, he knelt towards me and told me to take care of myself. At that time, I felt that it was weird, but I didn't think too much about it. Now that I thought about it, I realized that he seemed to have already prepared for this matter. My heart was in a mess. Although Shang-Chi and I were father and son, we were strangers after all. His death could not disturb my guilty conscience. At this moment, I was still worried about Lao Ai. Shang-Chi had sacrificed his life to break the restrictive spells of the Fire God Temple and allow Bayan to leave. Clearly, he hadn't done it to reunite with her. It definitely had something to do with the opening of the mountain and sea realm. The mountain and sea realm and Bayan were naturally closely connected. However, now that the stone door had appeared and all of the keys had been gathered, all conditions had been met to open it. So why had Bayan come? Why was Nangong waiting for her? I stopped beating around the bush and went straight to the point. Lao Ai hesitated for a moment. He looked at me and didn't say anything for a long time. Next to me, Nangong sighed and spoke on Bayan's behalf. You know who she is. However, the truth is that Bayan is not Bayan, but rather her spiritual essence. As for the 3 keys, they are formed from her fleshly body. Today, the 3 keys will need Bayan to control them. spiritual essence, fleshly body. After a long moment of silence, I finally understood what Nangong was saying. Bayan's spiritual essence was actually Bayan's soul. Years ago, when Monster Emperor Bai killed Bayan and left the mountain and sea realm, Bayan's soul remained in the Fire God Temple. After her fleshly body perished for some unknown reason, Yi Piampian and the other two were born from the bronze coffin in the Yinshang Royal Mausoleum. Therefore, from what Nangong was saying, it seemed that Yi Piampian and the other two weren't enough to open the door today. They also needed Bayan's help. The worry in my heart grew stronger. Earlier, I had been thinking about what would happen to Yi Piampian and the other two. However, in order to numb myself, I hadn't asked Nangong about it. Now that Bayan was involved, I had no choice but to ask. With that thought in mind, I immediately asked. When Nangong heard my question, he frowned and didn't say anything for a long time, as if he were weighing something in his heart. My worry grew, and I had a bad premonition. I grabbed Nangong's arm and anxiously asked, "What will happen?" Bayan grabbed my arm, and Nangong raised his head and looked at me. After a moment of silence, he said, "Vanish into thin air." When I heard those words, my mind buzzed and my face turned pale. Back in Medicine King's Valley, Nangong had told me to be mentally prepared when the mountain and sea realm opened. I had always thought that after the mountain and sea realm opened, the evil spirits would stand behind a monster race, and that was why he had said those words. Only now did I understand that he was referring to Bayan. The dizziness in my head didn't last for a day. I quickly woke up. I didn't think at all as I directly grabbed Bayan behind me. I exerted strength in my legs and circulated all of my cultivation to immediately escape from this place. The opening of the mountain and sea realm is an irresistible trend. Everyone has been waiting for this moment, and I know that as a prerequisite for the mountain and sea realm to open, no one will let Bayan go. Therefore, I couldn't hesitate for even a moment. Only then would I have a chance to escape. From start to finish, I hadn't thought about whether or not I should sacrifice Bayan. She was my wife, my only family. If she wasn't here, what was the point of anything else? Whether the mountain and sea realm opened or not, and whether the Magi and demon race, as well as whether Vice President Li and Celestial Master Zhang would have a chance to reach immortal ascension, none of that had anything to do with me. I didn't dare to think too much, and I didn't even dare to look around. If I did anything right now, it would slow me down. In the blink of an eye, I and Bayan were hundreds of meters away, heading toward the edge of the clouds. However, a moment later, I caught sight of elderly Celestial Master Zhang and Nangong standing in front of me. After the Ascension Realm, one can enter and exit, connect heaven and earth, and travel thousands of kilometers in the blink of an eye. The problem was that I had only just reached the Ascension Realm, while these three people were already half-step into the Sunset Realm. I bit my lip as I calculated the situation. Considering the level of my cultivation base, I definitely wasn't a match for the three of them. Even with Bayan, I had no hope of fighting back. Just as I was at a complete loss, a figure flickered to my side. The evil spirit was walking toward me. As soon as I saw him, my heart filled with hope. He also had a half-step into the Sunset Realm cultivation base, and he had always been on my side. If he could hold off these three people, then Bayan and I would have a chance to escape. Even as I thought about this, before I could say anything, the evil spirit paused for a moment, then walked over to stand with Nangong and the others. In that instant, my heart was filled with coldness. Even the evil spirit disregarded his status and stood in front of me. How could I survive today? I didn't feel any resentment, only sorrow. No matter if it was Nangong or the sacrificial evil spirit, in order to prepare for this day, they had waited for countless years and made countless preparations. Seeing that they had succeeded, it was impossible for them to stop. Thus, I couldn't find any reason to blame them. I could only hate myself. If I had known what would happen today, I wouldn't have fallen into such a passive situation. At this moment, Elder Li was the first to speak. His face was gloomy as he said to me, "Zhou Yi, today's matter isn't something you can handle on your own. I've waited for 1,000 years. I won't let you ruin my grand plan." 1,000 years? He had already lived for 1,000 years. If he hadn't reached the sunset realm, he was still immortal. I didn't know how this old thief had survived for so long. My heart grew heavier. He had lived for so long, and the only thing on his mind now was to seek immortal destiny. His will to open the mountain and sea realm was probably even more resolute than Nangong and the evil spirit. I remained silent. The evil sacrificial spirit walked in front of me and advised me in a low voice, "Don't let your emotions affect your decisions. We still need you to take care of the aftermath. Moreover, after that girl disappears, there will be an opportunity to see her again in the future. It's better to focus on the grand plan." The grand plan? The evil spirit had mentioned it to me many times in the past, but even now, I still didn't understand it. But no matter what the grand plan was, I didn't care. Swan and I was just a wisp of his soul. Now that his soul had disappeared, what was left? An opportunity to see him again? I was afraid it was just a meaningless excuse to stall me. I sneered inwardly. At this moment, I had lost all trust in the evil spirit. I looked up at him and said, "You should know what Swan and I means to me. I don't care what the grand plan is, you. Don't force me." The evil spirit fell silent. Nangong walked over and said to me, "Zhou Yi, there are some things I can't tell you yet, but you shouldn't stop me from doing this." Unlike the sacrificial evil spirit, I had already lost all trust in Nangong. After hearing his words, I only sneered coldly and didn't pay any attention to him. Seeing that Nangong's persuasion was useless, Celestial Master Zhang and President Li smiled coldly. Celestial Master Zhang moved closer to me. A person who was half a step into the sunset realm. Just his aura alone was frightening enough. I instantly felt a boundless pressure on me, and I almost knelt on the ground. But I didn't feel much fear. Half a step into the sunset realm. It was just breaking through to the sunset realm. If Celestial Master Zhang was alone, I might have a chance. Of course, even if there was no chance, I wouldn't give up. I was the only one who could stand in front of Swan and I today. If I bowed down, would Swan and I still be alive? No matter what, I had to fight. At most, we could be husband and wife under 9 Een in the future. Then, I pointed to the sky and shouted, "Sword come." In a flash, the Xianyuan sword broke through the air and landed in my hand. Then, I let go of Swan Ni's hands and circulated the Tao energy in my body. I mobilized all the power of my Yang God and sent it to the Xianyuan sword in my hand. Then, I activated the sword cultivation method in my heart, and the Xianyuan sword danced quickly in my hand. In the blink of an eye, a strong airflow appeared around me, wrapping me and Swan and I within. In the next second, the Xianyuan sword left my hand and was drawn into the airflow. Instantly, there was a burst of golden light, and thousands of small golden swords separated. A few seconds later, the wind and clouds stopped, and thousands of small swords formed a golden barrier in front of my chest. In the next moment, I frowned, and thousands of small swords attacked the people in front of me. The first to attack was naturally Celestial Master Zhang. When he saw what I did, he was shocked, but he calmed down immediately. He waved the horsetail whisk in his hand and set up a barrier in front of him in an attempt to block the many small golden swords. Unexpectedly, the small golden swords easily broke through his Tao energy barrier and were about to reach his face. Chapter 877. My body collapsed on the ground. The moment I lost my strength, I didn't feel annoyed or fearful because before I attacked, I had already made up my mind. Even if I were to die, I would only be able to coexist with Tao Wu in the 9 underworlds. Now, with old President Li's palm, it could be said that my wish was fulfilled. I was already prepared to die, but after sitting on the ground for a while, I realized that I hadn't lost my consciousness. It seemed that President Li's palm didn't take my life. At that moment, Tao Wu's voice resounded. She was still holding my hand as she looked at me and said gently, "Being able to marry husband is Tao Wu's greatest fortune. What happened today is Tao Wu's fate. Husband, you don't have to be angry or resist. Life and death in this world are in the cycle of reincarnation. That Jili tribe leader is right. In the future, you and I may meet again. Husband, take care. After saying that, she pressed her red lips on my forehead. After bowing, she let go of my hand and turned to nod at Nangong before walking towards the stone door. At that moment, apart from not losing my consciousness, I couldn't even feel my own body. I could only watch as Tao Wu stood up and left. I tried my best to open my mouth, but couldn't make sound. The fluttering red dress brushed past my face as Tao Wu's figure moved further and further away. Yi Piampian and the other two also walked over and followed behind Tao Wu. During the entire process, only Yi Piampian turned to look at me. Her face was as calm as Tao Wu's, and she even wore a smile. I didn't know why they were so calm in the face of death. I only felt a deathly stillness in my heart. Very soon, they reached the side of the stone door. The originally white stone door had been dyed gold after Xiao Jin's golden blood splashed on it. The four of them stood by the stone door. Then Yi Piampian and the other two held hands and surrounded Tao Wu. The three of them spun rapidly, and they seemed to be chanting and chirping at the same time, making a strange sound. Not long after, the three of them sped up and gradually turned into three different colored light rays that gathered above Tao Wu's head. In the next second, the light rays descended and enveloped Tao Wu. At the same time, Tao Wu's voice came from the light rays. Husband, take care. As soon as he finished speaking, Swan and I had already disappeared from where it was, merging into the tricolored light. Soon, the light dissipated, and a large bird flew out. The huge bird shape was a cross between a phoenix and a crow. On its forehead, there was a blazing pattern. It had a white beak and red feet. It should be the Jing Guard bird. The elite guard didn't crash into the stone door. Instead, he flew towards me and circled above my head, softly calling out. I stared at the Jingwei bird, and my throat kept moving. Finally, I let out a hoarse voice. Foo-foo. She seemed to hear my call, and her chirping suddenly became high-pitched. It seemed to be filled with endless longing and longing. When the song ended, she finally stopped circling, turned around, and flew toward the golden stone door like a bolt of lightning. When she arrived in front of the stone door, she spoke in a high-pitched voice once again. However, this time, there was no lingering yearning in her voice. Instead, it was filled with boundless dignity. As she sang, the mist around the stone gate dissipated, and a bright light shone down from the sky. Then, the Kirin, who hadn't moved for a long time, suddenly ran towards the light. When he got close, the elite guard moved too. One beast and one bird, one in the air, one on the ground, both crashed into the golden stone door. In the blink of an eye, the elite guard bird and the Kirin disappeared into the stone door. However, the stone door didn't move at all. It wasn't damaged, nor did it open. Just as everyone was feeling puzzled, the surrounding clouds suddenly surged, and the stone door also began to shake violently. In the distant horizon, there was a faint ear-piercing rumbling that seemed to be tearing everyone's eardrums apart. Just at that moment, the sacrificial evil spirit, who was standing next to me, suddenly waved his hand and brought me to where the witches were. Then he cast a witchcraft barrier in front of me, covering all the witches within it. Just like when we were fighting against the mist, the old president, Celestial Master Zhang, and the rest used their own techniques to protect their subordinates. Those who couldn't react in time weren't so lucky. At that moment, many of them were bleeding from their orifices above the clouds. After struggling for a while, they fell. After a few seconds, the rumbling in the faraway sky became even louder. The golden door suddenly exploded, creating a strong wave of air. The wave of air instantly tore the barrier that the sacrificial evil spirit had cast. Then, all of us were thrown out like shooting stars, falling into the distance. At that moment, I couldn't sense the cultivation around me at all. In the wave of air, my body was like a falling leaf drifting in the air. The strong wave of air was like countless blades. Not long after, I saw every inch of my skin being cut open and countless amounts of fresh blood splattered in the wind. Very quickly, My eyes became blurry and my eyelids became heavy. I almost fainted. Just like that, I drifted in the wind. I didn't know how long had passed until I felt my body hit something hard. Only then did I finally stop drifting. Immediately after, someone lifted my collar and slapped the top of my head. With that slap, my entire body shuddered, and my muddle-headed mind instantly woke up. My body, which I couldn't sense before, had recovered. Even the witchcraft and chi in my body started to circulate and nourish my body. Only then did I know that President Lee's attack hadn't destroyed my cultivation, but had only temporarily sealed it. As the witchcraft and chi circulated, the wounds on my body healed after a short while. Half a minute later, my stamina had recovered by 70 to 80%. At that moment, I finally regained my mobility. I stiffly turned my neck to take a look and realized that the sacrificial evil spirit was standing behind me. He should be the one who had saved me. Without saying a word, the sacrificial evil spirit grabbed my collar and flew in the direction we had come from. Perhaps he wanted to take me back to the mountain and sea realm, but Swan and I had already left. My heart was like a pool of stagnant water. The mountain and sea realm, the witches, and the monsters had lost all interest in me. However, I couldn't break free from the sacrificial evil spirit's grip, so I could only let him drag me along. The aftershock of the previous sound wave was still there, and even the sacrificial evil spirit couldn't increase his speed. As he flew forward, he set up a witchcraft barrier around him. After the barrier was broken, he set it up again. I didn't know how much time had passed, but the sacrificial evil spirit finally stopped and patted my back. Only then did I wake up from my daze. When I looked up, I saw that we had returned to our previous position. Apart from the sacrificial evil spirit, President Lee and the other three were in front of me. Apart from them, the others were nowhere to be seen. It was obvious that even with their cultivations, they couldn't protect the others from the previous sound wave. As for the others, they were also covered in wounds, and blood seeped out of their mouths and noses. On the other hand, I had completely recovered from my previous injuries. From the outside, I looked a bit stronger than the others. After the sacrificial evil spirit brought me here, the others only glanced at me for a moment before looking away and once again looking at the sky in front of them. Following their gazes, I discovered that the two immortal mountains in front of me had already disappeared. In the place where the stone door had been, there was now a black vortex. The vortex was unusually deep. Just looking at it made it seem as if it wanted to swallow my gaze. My heart grew cold, and I quickly looked away. This must be the mountain and sea realm that Swan and I had risked his life to open, right? As I thought about it, President Lee suddenly stepped forward, instantly arriving at the vortex. It seemed that he intended to enter and investigate. Unexpectedly, just as he raised his foot, a dark power suddenly burst out from the vortex. In the blink of an eye, old President Lee's protective barrier of Tao energy shattered, and he was sent flying back. Seeing this, the faces of the others in front of me instantly darkened. Clearly, they hadn't anticipated that the situation would be so troublesome. Just as everyone was at a loss as to what to do, a multicolored object suddenly surged out from the black vortex. Before anyone could react, the multicolored object arranged itself into a long and narrow crack. An ray of light suddenly shone out from the crack. Everyone was surprised by this change and wanted to go forward to investigate. Unexpectedly, a powerful suction force appeared from within the light, sucking in the clouds for thousands of miles. Immediately after, several claps of thunder flashed in the sky. Suddenly, a heavy rain began to fall from the clear sky. However, before the raindrops could fall to the ground, they were sucked away by the vortex. The suction force continued to strengthen, and the few of us couldn't control our bodies anymore. Gradually, we drew closer to the light. Seeing this, I had a bad premonition. I immediately circulated the shaman chi in my body and barely managed to stabilize myself. The people beside me seemed to have realized something, and they also used their own methods to stabilize themselves. The suction force from the light continued to strengthen, and there weren't any clouds in the surroundings. Old President Lee, who had been sent flying, quickly rushed back. After suffering from the previous attack, he naturally knew how dangerous the vortex was. Thus, he didn't dare to rush forward recklessly, and stood at the same spot as us. At that moment, the seawater beneath our feet surged, as though it was also affected by the suction force of the vortex. A few seconds later, the waves reached the sky, and a huge wave rose. A water column leaped into the sky and rushed toward the whirlpool. Not only that, but towering trees also flew over from the shore and were sucked into the vortex. As the suction force of the vortex continued to strengthen, we couldn't maintain our methods anymore, especially me. My body continuously swayed in the suction force. If it wasn't for the sacrificial evil spirit, I would have already been sucked into the vortex like the water and soil. Even so, we weren't able to hold on for long. The methods of those who were half a step into the Xiaoyu realm couldn't withstand the power of the vortex that could swallow the heaven and earth. In less than 15 minutes, the few of us were exhausted and were sucked into the vortex. As soon as I entered the vortex, I felt dizzy. I didn't know if it was because of something special about this place, or if it was the effect of being sucked into the vortex. However, the people who had followed me in earlier were nowhere to be seen. Occasionally, I could see some creatures, and they seemed to be in a panic. Under the intense dizziness, I couldn't focus and could only close my eyes, allowing my body to spin at high speed. I didn't know how much time had passed, but I heard an earth-shattering explosion. My body, which had been twisting, was sent flying by the shockwave from the explosion. Just like before, my body felt as though it had been cut by blades, but I was already exhausted and couldn't circulate my spiritual chi to resist. Chapter 878. After the initial discomfort, I was enveloped by the cold seawater. The dizziness in my head had subsided, and my body was no longer swaying in the wind. Slowly, I opened my eyes. I was surrounded by water, so dark that I couldn't see the end of it. It was as if I were at the bottom of the sea. In addition to me, there were also quite a few fish and crayfish in the murky water. Most likely, they had been sucked into the vortex just now and had sunk to the bottom of the sea. My gaze swept over the fish and crayfish, and just as I was thinking about how to get out of the water, I suddenly sensed something strange. The fish and crayfish around me were all huge, which wasn't a big deal. After all, they were marine creatures, so it was normal for them to be big. However, in addition to their huge bodies, they all had ghastly fangs in their mouths. When my gaze swept over them, they didn't retreat, but instead began to surround me. Something was wrong. These fishes and shrimps were definitely not ordinary creatures, and my first guess was that they were creatures from the mountain and sea realm. However, it didn't take long for me to change my mind. Moments ago, when I had been sucked into the vortex, I had seen seawater and fishes and shrimps surrounding me. Now that I had fallen into the vortex, there was no way those seawater fishes and shrimps would disappear. Most likely, they had fallen with me. Could it be that after arriving here, these fish and crayfish had changed? That was the most likely explanation. However, before I could figure it out, the fishes and crayfishes seemed to have colluded with each other and rushed towards me. All of them opened their bloody mouths, and their cold eyes were filled with frenzied, killing intent. Earlier, in order to resist the suction of the vortex, I had exhausted all of my cultivation base. Later, when I was sucked in, I was seriously injured and didn't have the strength to fight back. Looking at these crazed fish and crayfish, which were larger than me, I didn't hesitate. Without any hesitation, I flapped my limbs and tried to break out of the water. Unfortunately, my body was riddled with wounds, and because of the powerful water pressure, my movements were very slow. The fish and crayfish behind me seemed to have gone mad, and they moved with incredible speed. A few seconds later, I felt countless attacks coming from below me, and at the same time, the feeling of sharp teeth biting into me. Once one's cultivation reaches a certain level, one's fleshly body will also become tough. Therefore, I temporarily didn't take these attacks to heart. They couldn't break through my fleshly body's defense. However, as I swam upstream, more and more demonized fishes and shrimps chased after me and surrounded me. Almost every part of my body was being bitten and bitten. Thanks to my powerful body, I didn't receive any injuries. However, my arms and legs couldn't move anymore. I could only stand on the spot. In addition, I didn't have any cultivation to support me, and I was in an oxygen-free environment, so I couldn't hold on for much longer. His stamina was rapidly decreasing, and his lungs were burning. He had already choked on a lot of water. I tried to drive the fish and shrimps away, but it didn't work. A few minutes later, my head started to turn black. I was on the verge of fainting. In such an environment, fainting was equivalent to death. I knew it clearly, but I couldn't stop it. While my consciousness was drifting, the fishes and shrimps surrounding me seemed to disappear. The dark bottom of the water also shone. I seemed to see Lao AI walking toward me. Her frown and her smile were the same as when I lifted her veil. A second later, she reached her hand toward me. Her mouth opened and closed as if she wanted to take me away from this sea of suffering in this world. I knew she was dead, but my heart was filled with endless joy. I reached out my hand to grab her. The world was miserable, but it was so easy to be a ghostly couple. Eventually, I reached out and grabbed Lao AI's hand. Then, I felt an irresistible force pulling me out of the water. The darkness and the biting around me disappeared at the same time. I spat out a mouthful of seawater and opened my eyes in a daze. Then, I recognized that the person in front of me was an evil, sacrificial spirit. At this moment, his clothes were ragged. Apparently, he had suffered a lot in the whirlpool. Fortunately, he was stronger than me. After escaping, not only did he recover his cultivation base, but he was also able to save me. Seeing that I had calmed down a bit, he didn't say anything. He pulled my body and flew away. It seemed that he had left the mountain and sea realm and returned to the human world. After landing, he placed his hands on my chest. Thick shaman energy continuously flowed into my body. After a while, my wounds were healed and my cultivation base gradually increased. Only then did he stop. He seemed exhausted. He slumped to the ground and began to adjust his breathing. I was still confused. I looked around, but it was too dark to see anything. The evil sacrificial spirit didn't seem to care about me. After a moment of silence, I prepared to leave. However, after a few steps, I heard the evil sacrificial spirit's voice behind me. "Where are you going?" "Where am I going?" I felt neither joy nor sorrow. I had no worries in my heart. Where am I going? I didn't know. I just wanted to leave this place as soon as possible. Seeing that I didn't respond, the evil sacrificial spirit appeared in front of me. His face was grim as he looked at me. After a moment of silence, he sighed. The opening of the mountain and sea realm is only the beginning. There are still many things you need to do. Don't be so dispirited. After hearing what he had to do, an indescribable anger burned in my heart. If it weren't for that, Byron wouldn't have vanished into thin air, and I wouldn't have suffered the pain of losing a loved one. The evil sacrificial spirit kept saying that there were things he needed me to do, but had he ever considered my feelings? I took a deep breath and suppressed my anger. "The mountain and sea realm has been opened," I said coldly. "Whatever happens next has nothing to do with me." With that, I circled around the evil sacrificial spirit and tried to leave. He chased after me for the second time. This time, he didn't talk nonsense with me. Instead, he grabbed my shoulder and lifted me up into the sky. I didn't know what he wanted, but I wasn't afraid. I just continued to laugh coldly. Soon, we were about 100 meters in the air. The evil sacrificial spirit stopped and pointed in front of us. "Look down there," he said. "See if you can see any changes." I subconsciously looked in the direction he was pointing. There seemed to be a small coastal town in front of them. At this time, there were no lights, only collapsed houses, and the cries of many people, carried along with the night wind. Thinking back to the power of the vortex, I guessed that the town had been destroyed because of it. I didn't know what the evil sacrificial spirit meant, But the calamity that would come with the opening of the mountain and sea realm wasn't limited to this small town. If I had to take responsibility for it, it would be a complete joke. The evil sacrificial spirit seemed to see the disdain in my eyes and said, "Spread out your spiritual sense a bit further." I frowned, feeling a bit impatient. However, I did as he said and spread out my spiritual sense a bit further. After advancing, my spiritual sense had become much stronger, and I could see things within 50 kilometers. As far as the eye could see, everything within 50 kilometers was dark. There wasn't a single light to be seen. Furthermore, it wasn't just in one direction. Everywhere I looked was dilapidated. I was a bit surprised. We were in a coastal city that was quite developed. Normally, it would be brightly lit and bustling with activity. Why did it look so dilapidated? Could it be that it was also the result of the vortex? Shocked, I took a deep breath and spread out my spiritual sense a bit further. Soon, I saw a city with collapsed buildings and collapsed mountains. The sound of crying could be heard everywhere. It was like hell on earth. Clearly, I underestimated the power of the vortex. Everything within 50 kilometers, or perhaps even farther, was destroyed by the power of the vortex. Not only did the opening of the mountain and sea realm cause me pain that will be carved into my bones, it also brought a catastrophe to the world of mortals. However, I still didn't understand why the evil sacrificial spirit had asked me to pay attention to such things. No matter how you looked at it, it couldn't be blamed on me, and I couldn't do anything to save the situation. I looked away and turned to the evil sacrificial spirit. This matter has nothing to do with me, and I can't do anything about it. After hearing that, the evil sacrificial spirit shook his head. You misunderstand. I just want you to feel the changes in heaven and earth. I've already investigated the scene you saw just now. The entire human world is in the same state. What? The entire human world? Even though I had raised the danger level of the vortex by several levels, I never would have dared to imagine that it could affect the entire human world. According to what he said, there wasn't a single place in the human world that was intact. After I calmed down a bit, the evil sacrificial spirit said, "Actually, this isn't the result of the opening of the vortex. Although the vortex is powerful, it can't affect the entire human world. In fact, after the mountain and sea realm opened and merged with the human world, the changes were brought about. We are no longer in the human world, but rather the human world that has merged with the mountain and sea realm." After hearing that, I didn't say anything for a long time. The shock in my heart couldn't be any greater. After a moment of silence, the evil sacrificial spirit told me that the mountain and sea realm was an independent space, just like the human world. When we opened the gate, the two worlds connected and merged. That was something that they had known for a long time. I listened to his explanation in a daze. Now that I understood everything, I felt relieved. So what if the human world had changed? Buy-in was gone, and there was nothing left in the human world that I missed. It didn't matter what happened to me. After saying so much, the evil sacrificial spirit seemed to be discouraged when he saw that I didn't respond. After looking at me for a long time, he said, "Come find me later." Then he left. Chapter 879. According to the records in the death scripture, after the Yang spirit ascension, one could travel thousands of kilometers in the blink of an eye, connecting heaven and earth. Of course, this didn't mean that one could travel thousands of kilometers in the blink of an eye. It was just that cultivators in this realm had the ability to fly thousands of kilometers. Their cultivation base was connected to heaven and earth, and they didn't have to worry about running out of spiritual power. With these thoughts in mind, I didn't look for any other means of transportation on the way back to the Fire God Temple. I decided to fly the entire way. In fact, after experiencing the huge change earlier, it was also a big problem whether they could find other means of transportation at this time. As I flew, I looked down at the land below me. It wasn't until the 8th collapsed city entered my view that I no longer doubted the evil spirit's words. Huge changes have occurred in the mortal world, and the number of people who have died is unimaginably high. It's laughable that I was worried about what would happen after the mountain and sea realm was opened, and that the demon folk would wreak havoc in the mortal world. But now, it seems that just the process of opening the mountain and sea realm is enough to cause a catastrophe. As soon as I landed in Shenangjia, I sensed that the aura was a bit strange. Shenangjia used to be filled with abundant spiritual energy, but now it was much thinner. Instead, it was filled with a dense, savage aura. Most likely, the savage, ancient aura of the mountain and sea realm had reached this place. This savage, ancient aura didn't affect me, but I wasn't sure what effect it would have on other ordinary living beings. As I walked toward the fire god temple, I passed several mountain peaks along the way. Normally, ordinary mountains were 1,000 or 2,000 meters above sea level, but now I could sense that they had at least doubled in elevation. I frowned. All of this was probably due to the mountain and sea realm. Raising a small mountain from 1,000 to 2,000 meters above sea level to 2,000 to 3,000 meters above sea level would not have much of an impact on the surrounding climate. However, if the Kunlun mountain range, Himalayas, and other mountains that were easily 6,000 to 7,000 or 8,000 meters above sea level were also raised according to this ratio, the entire world's climate would probably undergo a huge change. Of course, the change in climate was a slow process, and I couldn't sense it yet. I could only calculate it in my mind. The collapse of a city's buildings, no matter how many casualties there were, was only a temporary threat. However, if the entire world's environment underwent a huge change, the impact would be long-lasting and could even completely change the way humans lived. As I was thinking about these things, I heard a bird's cry above my head when I reached the Red Cloud Gorge. There were countless birds and beasts in Shenangjia, so it was normal to hear the cries of birds occasionally. However, there seemed to be some kind of spiritual energy ripple in this bird's cry, and the sound was unusually loud. With my cultivation, I naturally wouldn't be affected, but if it was an ordinary person without cultivation, I'm afraid that they would faint from the sound of the bird's song. I lifted my head and saw a 3-meter-long bird hovering above my head. From its appearance, it didn't look like a bird of prey or a falcon. Instead, it looked like a colorful house sparrow or a parrot. In addition to its shocking size, the bird's eyes were blood red, and when it cried out, its mouth seemed to have sharp teeth. I couldn't help but think of the fish and crayfish I'd seen at the bottom of the sea when I was sucked in a mountain and sea realm. At that time, I guess that the fish and crayfish had been affected by the mountain and sea realm after being sucked into the whirlpool and had changed. Looking at the birds circling above my head, I was even more certain of this. However, I hadn't expected that the mountain and sea realm's aura would affect so far away. If all the birds and beasts in the world underwent such a change, the result would be unimaginable. After remaining silent for a long time, I suddenly grinned. Bai had already turned into a Jingwei bird and completely disappeared. Why should I worry about this bird above my head that had nothing to do with me? I should first return to the fire god temple. I sighed and stopped walking. Instead, I leaped into the air and quickly flew above the fire god temple. When I arrived, I lowered my head to take a look. I was startled. The front hall of the fire god temple had collapsed. I didn't know if it had been affected by the mountain and sea realm's opening, or if it had been caused by Shang-Chi risking his life to help Bai escape. But that didn't matter. There was nothing in the front hall to begin with. With a wave of my hand, I cleared away the rubble and debris. Then I descended from the air and walked towards my room. The room at the back of the temple hadn't been affected by the collapse of the front hall. When I reached the door, I saw that the furnishings were the same as before. Bai An's figure seemed to appear in front of me again, softly waiting for my return. After standing there in silence for a long while, I returned to reality. The peach blossoms were still there, but Bai was gone. The pain I'd been suppressing all this time finally erupted. I collapsed on the bed and sniffed the non-existent aura on the pillow. My tears were like floodwaters that had opened a floodgate, drenching a large area in an instant. I hated it. I couldn't accept it. From a long time ago, I had clearly understood that if I didn't want to be controlled by others, if I wanted to be with Bai forever, I had to increase my cultivation. But I had gone from being a mere earth master to becoming a heavenly master all the way to the Yang Spirit Ascension. All along the way, I had used up all my strength and seized all the opportunities. But in the end, standing in front of President Li and Heavenly Master Zhang, I still didn't have the slightest power to fight back. I could only watch as everything happened. What should I do? What could I do? After returning to the Fire God Temple, the last bit of my will to support me disappeared. I lay on the bed, feeling that everything in the world had nothing to do with me. There was nothing I needed to do. I just wanted to sleep. In fact, I did sleep. I was in a daze and had countless dreams. In the dreams, my parents and mine were there. My entire life seemed to have gone back and forth several times. From time to time, I would reunite happily, but in the end, it would turn into the pain of parting. When I woke up, I didn't know how much time had passed. My surroundings were pitch black and there was no light. It must have been late at night. My mind was blank. After lying on the bed for a long time, I finally got up and wandered aimlessly around the Fire God Temple. I didn't know how, but I ended up at the back of the temple where Bayan had been imprisoned. This place was different from the other places. It wasn't crimson, but it was deep and serene. I couldn't see the end of it. I lifted my foot and stepped in. As soon as I entered the cave, I felt that the surroundings were extremely cold. It was very different from the other places in the Fire God Temple. Looking around, other than the cold stone walls on all sides, there was nothing else. It was easy to imagine what kind of torture Lao AI had endured in this endless cold without any daylight. I sighed. I couldn't bear to stay here any longer. I wanted to turn around and leave. But as soon as I turned around, the sound of something heavy falling came from inside the cave. I turned my head to look at the source of the sound. Then, I realized that on the stone wall above the cave, there were many broken stones and mud pieces falling. The sound just now was caused by the broken stones falling to the ground. I casually looked at the stone wall where the broken stones had fallen and suddenly found something special. After the broken stones fell, there seemed to be some engravings on the stone wall. Bayan had been staying here all this time. Could it be something she had left behind? After being stunned for a while, I quickly walked over and cleaned up the broken stones and mud, revealing a large painting on the stone wall. The painting was dozens of meters long. It reminded me of the murals in the tunnel of the Shang dynasty's royal tomb. After taking a closer look, the painting style was almost the same, but the content was different. I was disappointed. It was obvious that the murals weren't left behind by Bayan. It should be the work of a merchant. This was the temple of the Kanbo, and the murals were hidden so deeply that I could see them. It was most likely done by Shang-Chi on purpose. Could it be that he wanted to convey some kind of message to me through the murals? As I thought about it, I came back to reality and looked at the murals. In the first mural, there was only a simple room with 4 people sitting inside. From their actions, they seemed to be talking about something. The mural was exquisitely drawn, and the people sitting around it were drawn with great detail. I took a quick look and quickly found that one of them was different from the other 3. There seemed to be a mane around his body. Although he was sitting sideways, from the details of his expression, I could roughly tell that this person was most likely Monster Emperor Bai. Besides him, there was another person among the other 3. He was sitting behind with his head lowered. He didn't seem to be participating in the discussion. His silhouette was familiar. After thinking for a while, I recalled the Yin Emperor shadow that I had seen in the Medicine King Valley. This person was most likely Shinnong. In that case, the person beside him was Xin Yuan, and standing behind him, I could only see his back, and there seemed to be 2 horns on his head. Could it be Qiyu? Were they plotting the huge conspiracy that had been going on for thousands of years that had trapped me? There were only pictures in the murals, but no words. I could only speculate, but I couldn't verify it. After a while, I took a deep breath and looked at the second mural. In this mural, the first thing that caught my eye was a crack in the sky. The crack was extremely deep, and it made me feel fearful. Under the crack, there was chaos, as though the entire world was in chaos. The people from before were also among them, but the difference was that Shiyu was now standing behind Monster Emperor Bai. This mural was related to my previous doubts. Shiyu was originally a member of the witch race, so it was normal for him to follow behind Shinnong. However, in the end, He had become Monster Emperor by subordinate, and had followed the monster race to attack the human race. I didn't know what had happened in between. Not only that, from the first mural, although the people were discussing, they were getting along well. But in the second mural, they suddenly started fighting. This didn't make sense. I continued to look. In the third mural, the Yin Emperor and Monster Emperor were fighting in the mountain and sea realm, and then the Yellow Emperor was riding a dragon to kill Chiyu. Chapter 880. After pondering for a long time, I couldn't make any headway. I silently memorized the appearance of the crack and continued to look at the next mural. In the next mural, there were only two people. From their appearances, they looked like Emperor Ku and Shang-Chi. Moreover, Emperor Ku seemed to be instructing Shang-Chi about something. It should be a plan regarding everything. As I continued to look, Emperor Ku and Monster Emperor Jun both died. The human world slaughtered the Tai Sui and offered sacrifices. Finally, there was an old man sitting alone on a cloud platform. Beside him, there was a vague diagram of 8 trigrams. Most of the things recorded in the later mural were things that I already knew. At this point, the mural had already covered the entire stone wall. I activated the spiritual power in my body and attacked the surrounding stone walls. However, after searching for a while, I couldn't find any other mural, so I had to give up. The information that was transmitted from the previous few murals was mostly things that I already knew. The only thing that made me suspicious was the first 2 murals. Monster Emperor Jun and the other 3 sat down to discuss. Later on, when they met on the battlefield, there must have been a turning point. If the previous discussion was just a negotiation before the war, everything would make sense. However, the murals were very vivid. In the first mural, the 4 of them didn't have any intention of drawing their swords. They looked as though they were on the same side. From the overall quality of the painting, it definitely wasn't a mistake on Shang-Chi's part. It must have been intentional. After thinking for a long time, I suddenly had an unimaginable thought. Could it be that the ancient war had been planned by them in advance? Otherwise, why would the merchant contract record the scene of the 4 people's discussion? If that was the case, then the deaths of Shinnong, Monster Emperor Jun, Emperor Ku, and the others were all part of their plan. Or were they plotting? While I found this inconceivable, I even felt my heart tremble. Who else could make these ancient gods use their lives to scheme against me? After sitting in silence for a while, I couldn't confirm if my guesses were true. Now that Shang-Chi was dead, the only person who knew the inside story was the evil spirit, priest. However, in the matter of Lao AI, he disregarded his status and disobeyed my wishes. At this time, I can no longer win his trust. In the end, I let out a long sigh. No matter what the plot was, as Bayan had disappeared, everything was meaningless to me. Why should I care so much about it? As I thought about it, I mocked myself and walked out of the cave. I continued to head towards the hidden area behind the fire god temple. Before he could take a few steps, he felt a strong pressure coming from the front. When Momo disappeared from here and I chased him here, I felt this kind of oppression. At that time, I knew that there was a restriction here, but I didn't expect that after so many years, my cultivation had reached the Yang spirit breakthrough, but I still couldn't do anything to the restriction here. I tried to take a few more steps forward, but the great pressure in front of me became even stronger. Then, no matter how much I urged my cultivation, I was unable to take another step forward. I wasn't willing to give up, so I activated the Xianyuan sword and dashed forward. After a while, I heard a loud explosion. The place where the sword energies collided created a strong airwave. Before I could react, I was sent flying dozens of meters away. Amidst the explosion, the entire fire god temple trembled. Fortunately, the temple was extremely tough, and only some dust fell from the cave, but it did not collapse. When I got up and returned to my previous position, I tried again and found that the restriction was still there. It was obvious that with my current strength, I couldn't shake the restriction at all. I had no choice but to give up and retreat from the cave. After such a torment, my body felt slightly tired. Just as I was about to return to my room to rest, I suddenly felt a strong spiritual power fluctuation coming from outside the fire god temple. I frowned and quickly got up. I had only taken a few steps when I heard another explosion. I could faintly feel the fatty's aura. Why is he here? I sped up and quickly arrived outside the temple. I lifted my head to look and saw that the fatty wasn't far from the temple. He was fighting against a huge bird that was at least 10 meters tall. Seeing this terrifying giant bird, I was momentarily dazed. After a moment of shock, I reacted. This giant bird seemed to be the one I had met in the Sunset Brook Gorge. I frowned. It had only been a few days, but this bird had grown to such an extent. It was too strange. The outside of the fire god temple was originally a lush green field, but after their fight, it had become a mess. The fatty noticed my appearance and quickly shouted, "Third baby, quickly come and save me." Save him? The fatty was a seal heavenly master, so how could he not do anything to this feathered beast? Just as I had doubts, the giant bird spread its huge wings. With just a flap, it created a gust of wind that flipped the fatty to the ground. Immediately after, the giant bird rose up. Its long and sharp beak was like a mountain-splitting blade as it pecked at the fatty's head. Seeing this, I didn't dare to just stand by and watch. I leaped and instantly appeared in front of the giant bird. Tao energy circulated in my hand as I slapped the giant bird's forehead. With my cultivation, even if the giant bird had the cultivation of a heavenly master, it would still die from exhaustion. Thus, I didn't care about it and bent down to help the fatty up. However, I didn't expect the giant bird to only shake its head after receiving the attack, as if it had already dispersed the force. Then, it immediately extended its beak to peck at me. I was shocked. I didn't have time to think and immediately used the witchcraft energy materialization technique. In the blink of an eye, several dark green swords appeared in my hand. I casually swung them, and the small swords left my hand and headed straight for the giant bird's face. The giant bird seemed to be quite intelligent. Seeing the small swords coming at it, it immediately stopped moving and crossed its wings in front of its body to protect its body. Soon, the dark green swords hit its huge wings and made a pu-pu sound. However, the witchcraft energy materialization power wasn't something that could be easily blocked. After the collision, the giant bird flew back dozens of meters and hit the ground hard. I didn't know if it was dead or alive. For the time being, I didn't care about it and immediately pulled the fatty up from the ground. I wanted to ask him how he had encountered the giant bird. Unexpectedly, the big bird stood up again and let out a drum-like cry. A pair of scarlet eyes glared at me. Their pupils were filled with anger. Seeing this scene, I couldn't describe the shock in my heart. Although I hadn't used my full strength during the previous 2 attacks, with my current cultivation base, a wave of my hand had the cultivation base of an ordinary young god heavenly master. Moreover, I had used the witchcraft energy materialization technique, so it was easy for me to kill a heavenly master at the late stage of the young god realm. However, the giant bird wasn't hurt at all. It even had the strength to provoke me again. What kind of monster is this? How can its skin and flesh be so hard? While I was thinking, the giant bird seemed to be afraid. It didn't attack again and suddenly spread its wings. It was different from when it had waved its wings to hit the fatty. This time, it waved its wings gently and didn't create a strong wind. It just urged an airflow to sweep toward us. This airflow had a disgusting smell. As soon as it arrived, I felt my head become heavy. It was obvious that the giant bird had used some kind of secret technique. At this moment, I didn't dare to underestimate the giant bird anymore. I immediately opened my mouth and spat out the Xian Yuan sword. Using the sword cultivation technique, I dashed toward the giant bird. With the help of the sword cultivation technique, the speed of the Xian Yuan sword was extremely fast. The giant bird didn't have time to react. In the blink of an eye, the sword light pierced through its body, leaving a big hole. Then, the giant bird swayed in the air for a few seconds. Finally, it stopped moving and fell to the ground. I flew forward and carefully examined it. After confirming that it was dead, I heaved a sigh of relief and returned to my original spot. At this moment, the fatty looked distressed. Blood was still oozing out of his mouth. I put my hand on his back and urged my spiritual power to help him heal his internal injuries. Around 15 minutes later, the fatty's injuries were almost healed. I retracted my hand and asked, "Where did this giant bird come from? How did you bump into it?" Speaking of the giant bird, the fatty was also dumbfounded. He told me that when he passed by the Crimson Mist Gorge, he accidentally saw the giant bird. He was surprised and wanted to get closer to take a look. Who would have thought that as soon as he got close, the giant bird would attack him? At first, the fatty didn't think much of it. He thought that the feathered animal was big and didn't have much strength. But after fighting it, he found that he couldn't deal with it. Helpless, he could only run to the fire god temple and ask for my help. After listening to him, I confirmed that the giant bird was the same one I saw before. I pondered for a moment. Previously, I speculated that the giant bird was an original species of the human world. It was only stimulated by the primordial aura of the mountain and sea realm that made it look like a monster. Now, after seeing the giant bird's transformation in a few days, I was even more certain of this point. From this, it seems that the calamity of the human world is even greater than I had imagined. If a few monsters like this giant bird were to be born everywhere, there would be no more days of peace. As I pondered these things, the fatty suddenly sighed and said, "I came here to find you because of the monster. You might not know this, but ever since the mountain and sea realm opened, the human world has fallen. The demonic tribe of the mountain and sea realm has been mobilized, wantonly wreaking havoc. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that the people have been plunged into misery and suffering. Not only that, but many of the ordinary species in the world have also changed. For example, that giant bird just now has become no different from a monster. I'd already thought about the giant bird, but the matter of the demonic tribe made me frown. Earlier, Nangong had said that if the demonic tribe invaded after the mountain and sea realm opened, he would have a way to deal with it. How did things end up like this? I asked the fatty, but he sighed and shook his head. Clearly, everything Nangong had said before was just an excuse to temporarily calm me down. In reality, he had no way to deal with the situation. I already had a lot of complaints about the matter of Bayan, and now that I heard about it, I was even angrier. Previously, I had thought that he had been planning for the legacy of the shaman tribe for 1,000 years, and that he was a loyal and righteous person. He was the same as President Li and Celestial Master Zhang. They were all selfish people who only cared about themselves. Filled with anger, the fatty continued. This time, Elder Uncle Nangong sent me to find you. He wanted you to come out and lead the shaman tribe to fight against the monster. Chapter 881. I was already disheartened, and coupled with my conflict with Nangong, I didn't think too much about it. I shook my head and refused the fatty. Seeing my reaction, the fatty became anxious and continuously tried to persuade me. However, I'd already made up my mind, so I naturally wouldn't be moved by a few words. After he spoke for a while, I interrupted him and changed the topic. "Fatty, let's not talk about this for now. There's something I'm curious about. Nangong is a member of the witch tribe. How did he get involved with your sect? Although he hasn't done anything detrimental to your sect, he's a very scheming person. Who knows when he might implicate your sect? If you have time, you should advise Guan not to get too involved with him." The fatty's face was blank, as if he hadn't expected me to suddenly bring up this topic. After a moment of silence, he shook his head and looked at me cautiously. "Third child, I know you're still worried about Swan and I. I don't have the right to speak on this matter, but Martial Uncle Nangong isn't as unbearable as you say. He should have his own difficulties." Hearing the fatty defend Nangong, I didn't have the mood to continue talking. I lifted my foot and returned to the fire god temple. The fatty caught up with me and continued to persuade me. He wanted to change my mind. The fatty had always been a lazy person. I didn't know what was wrong with him this time, but his words were filled with a sense of responsibility. He talked for a full hour, but seeing that I wasn't moved, he seemed to be discouraged. He sighed and became silent. I thought he had finally given up and was about to speak to ease the atmosphere. After all, I had a close relationship with the fatty. There was no need to ruin our friendship for Nangong. However, before I could say anything, the fatty spoke again. "Third baby," he said, "the truth is, I don't really understand. You said that the mountain and sea realm was connected to the human world in ancient times. How did the humans survive in such an environment and even grow so strong?" "That's right, third baby." The fact that he had suddenly changed the subject indicated that he knew he couldn't change my mind. After a moment of thought, I said, "According to my speculations, rather than saying that the mountain and sea realm is opening, it would be more accurate to say that the ancient wildlands aura is coming out of the mountain and sea realm. I came into contact with the savage ancient chi before, and it should be the primal chaos left behind at the beginning of the world. That's why it possesses such great power. Back in ancient times, the mortal realm probably also had an aura like this. However, after the mountain and sea realm was isolated from the rest of the world, and after thousands of years of rapid development, the desolate aura in the mortal realm was almost completely used up. Perhaps the mountain and sea realm had more desolate ancient aura, or perhaps less of it was used up. Over the past few days, I had already made some conjectures in my mind, so I didn't think much about it before I told him my conjectures. Actually, there were some things I didn't say. It was highly likely that the primal chaos aura was the foundation of the Tai Sui, and that the Tai Sui was the source of Tao and Shaman Chi. Therefore, in some ways, the power of primal chaos was the source of power for all cultivators in the world. If that was the case, it would explain why President Li and Celestial Master Zhang were so eager to open the mountain and sea realm, and why they were so certain that a mortal destiny could be found in the mountain and sea realm. Even the things I said on the surface made the fatty stunned. After pondering silently for a while, he suddenly said, "So you're saying that this kind of aura is not only beneficial to those monsters, but it's also beneficial to us humans? When the demonic beasts improve their cultivation bases, humans also improve. Is that why the ancient humans were able to grow so strong?" This kid really did have some intelligence. Originally, I had thought that I would have to explain a bit more, but it turned out that he had figured it out on his own. However, what he said was just a general idea. In reality, the Tao energy the human cultivators generally used had to be transformed by the Tai Sui clan. The Tai Sui clan had already become a legend, and with the passing of Little Gold, even I didn't know where the Tai Sui could be found. If humans wanted to absorb the ancient energy of the wild wasteland, it would be very difficult for them to do so. Of course, there were too many things involved, so I didn't explain it to Fatty. After discussing this issue, the two of us sank into silence again. Fatty hesitated, as if he wanted to say something more. When I sensed that, I interrupted him. I got up and told him to rest while I went to prepare dinner for him. The fire god temple already had some ingredients, so I went outside to find some wild vegetables and wild animals. I tore off a huge leg from the huge bird that I had killed earlier and cooked it together to make a sumptuous dinner. With wine and meat, Fatty didn't mention his mission this time. While drinking and eating, he chatted with me about what had happened in the past years. The two of us laughed and joked, almost forgetting about the things that had happened in the mortal world. After we ate and drank to our heart's content, we fell asleep. In the blink of an eye, it was already the next morning. Fatty seemed to have matured a lot. After he got up, he tried to persuade me one last time. Seeing that I wasn't moved, he said goodbye, saying that there were many things waiting for him to do in the outside world. He even jokingly said that if I didn't go back, he would have to share my burden. I didn't respond to the hint in his words and just smiled as I said goodbye to him. Since Fatty's cultivation base wasn't high enough, he couldn't fly for a long time. Moreover, there were many wild animals in Shenangjia, and I was worried that there would be another bird-like monster. Thus, I got up and prepared to send Fatty out of Shenangjia's range before returning. Fatty naturally didn't refuse. The two of us moved forward together. With my help, we left the forest after an hour. Just as I was about to say goodbye to Fatty, the sound transmitting talisman in Xiang Lu's pouch suddenly vibrated. I frowned and took out the sound transmitting talisman. After a careful look, I saw that the person who had sent the message was Zhang Canwen. The content of the message was only a few words. Wang Li has been kidnapped. Return quickly. Something happened to Wang Li again? I didn't have time to think and hurriedly replied, asking what had happened. A few seconds later, Zhang Qinwen sent another message. He told me that little Wang Li had been taken away by a huge monster. He wasn't strong enough and was injured. Now he was being chased. Previously, I had only talked about the calamity in the mortal world. Besides that huge bird, I didn't know anything else. But in the blink of an eye, this matter had spread to people I was familiar with. Speaking of which, it really made me sigh. However, after thinking for a while, I felt that it was strange. Since there was a monster, why didn't it attack Zhang, Canwen, and the others? Instead, it attacked the harmless little Wang Li. After thinking for a while, I couldn't figure it out. But no matter what, I couldn't stay out of this matter anymore. After sighing, I asked Zhang Canwen for his current location. When I sent the message, the fatty didn't know what had happened. After I had dealt with it, I simply informed him and asked if he wanted to travel with me. Hearing that, the fatty was overjoyed. He immediately took out the sound transmitting talisman. After giving some instructions, he urged me to set off. After bringing along the fatty, who was a burden, his flying speed inevitably decreased. This was because I was helping him from the side. Otherwise, with his current cultivation, it would be best for him to walk on the ground. Only when he encountered an impassable place would he be able to use the flying technique as an emergency measure. At first, I was very anxious, but after thinking about it, although Zhang Qinwen wasn't lacking in hot-bloodedness, he had always been steady in his actions. He had already informed me of the news. What he needed to do now was to track the monster that had kidnapped Wang Li and not risk his life, so there shouldn't be any danger to his life. If I arrived earlier or later, it wouldn't have much of an impact. After thinking it through, I wasn't in a hurry. While taking care of the fatty, I also had the spare energy to observe the situation on my way. It wasn't much different from the mess I'd seen before. Along the way, there were still ruins everywhere. In the desolate scene, there are also rotting corpses and human bones. Seeing this made my heart feel suffocated. I couldn't tell what this feeling was. After traveling for a while, a monster suddenly appeared in front of me. This monster looked like a wild swine. Its body was more than 6 meters long, and its pair of huge fangs were covered in blood. It was wantonly killing humans. Although I had told the fatty that I didn't want to interfere with the monster's rampage, I couldn't suppress the anger in my heart when I saw such a tragic scene. I took the initiative to ask the fatty to stop and land on the ground. Then, I went straight to the monster. After the rush, my understanding of all living things in the world had increased by another level. After the previous fight with the big bird, I had roughly figured out how to judge the monster's cultivation realm. The strength of this ugly, wild, hot demonic beast in front of me was merely at the level of a seal. When I approached it, I casually waved my hand, and a strand of shaman chi that carried sword insight pierced through the demonic beast's head like a bolt of lightning. After a short moment, the demonic beast's head exploded from the middle with a bang, and its sturdy body dashed out another tens of meters due to inertia before crashing to the ground like a collapsing mountain. When the surrounding people who were being killed by the monster saw this scene, their faces were full of astonishment and shock. After a few seconds, they reacted and knelt in front of me, shouting for the immortals to appear. In the past, cultivators would be very careful when casting spells in the mortal world, and I would also try my best to avoid such a situation. But now that the monster was wreaking havoc, it was better to show some of my methods in front of people to let them know that it wasn't the end of the world. Since I was worried about little Wang Li, I didn't stay here any longer and directly flew away with the fatty. Along the way, I thought about the 2 monsters I had seen and couldn't help but worry. The big bird's cultivation should be at the late stage of yang spirit or even at the peak stage, while the wild swine, just now, was at the middle stage of the seal stage. If converted to human cultivation, it meant that these 2 monsters were at least at the celestial master level. If the monsters that were wreaking havoc everywhere were at the celestial master level, it would be very difficult to set things right. Fortunately, after consulting with the fatty, according to what he said, that was not the case. On the way to the fire god temple, he had met many demonic beasts with cultivations below the heavenly master. There are all kinds of cultivations, but he had only met one demonic beast with a cultivation above the seal. Including the big bird and the wild swine, he had only seen a total of 3. After listening to his explanation, I heaved a sigh of relief, but I still didn't dare to be careless. Although there weren't celestial masters everywhere like I had imagined, there were monsters of all levels. This meant that it was very likely that there were monsters at the Ascension stage, and there might even be Ascension stage monsters. In the human world, the big bird that had just absorbed the savage ancient chi could leap to the yang spirit stage. In the mountain and sea realm, after thousands of years of nourishment, it seemed logical that there would be Ascension stage monsters. Chapter 882. At this time, Jean Camlin's clothes were ragged, and he was sitting on a stone slab with his eyes closed. I examined him and found that he was already at the early stage of Yang God realm. He was the successor of Wen Shan's bloodline, and he had a morality spell. Coupled with his talent, it was only natural that he had reached the early stage of Yang God realm in just over a year. However, his aura was weak, and he was clearly injured. To be able to take someone from the hands of Yang God Heavenly Master and injure him, it was clear that the monster he encountered was not easy to deal with. While I was thinking, Jean Kinwen opened his eyes. When he saw us, a smile appeared on his pale face. "You're finally here." Then he got up. Seeing that he was struggling, I quickly went to him and helped him sit down. Then I placed my hands on his back and circulated my Tao energy to help him recover. After about 15 minutes, Jean Camlin's injuries were 80 to 90% healed. Then I retracted my hands and adjusted my breathing. Now that the mountain and sea realm had opened, the ancient desolate chi filled the air. When I adjusted my breathing, the Tao and Magus chi in my body seemed to circulate much faster. After a short while, I recovered my cultivation and opened my eyes. At this time, Jean Camlin clasped his hands to thank me, then asked me what method I had used to heal him and how it was so effective. In just a short while, his injuries were completely healed. Using chi of the way to heal people is the most basic method in the cultivation world. However, this method can only stabilize people's injuries. It is very difficult to make people recover. However, the evil spirit taught me a healing method that can help people recover quickly. After I reached the Ascension realm, my body produced another spiritual force. When I heal, I can use that spiritual force to supplement my chi of the way, and the speed at which my injuries recover is even faster. I didn't know what that spiritual power was, so when Jean Camlin asked, I briefly explained it to him. Jean Camlin didn't care about the details, but when he heard that I had reached the Ascension realm, he was shocked. After a while, he calmed down and said with a smile, "You have the talent of 4 meridians, and you've had many fortuitous encounters over the years. It's reasonable for you to reach the Ascension realm." After exchanging pleasantries, Jean Camlin got down to business. He told me that after little Wang Li was taken away, he had been tracking it all the way, but after the monster arrived here, there was suddenly no trace of it, so he stayed here to heal while waiting for me. Then he worriedly asked me, "A few days ago, there was a big disaster in Shenzhen. Communication and transportation were all cut off. Then, the monster beast started to wreak havoc. What happened?" Not to mention Jean Camlin. Everyone in the world had the same doubts. After a moment of thought, I told him everything I knew about the mountain and sea realm. Now that the mortal world was facing a great catastrophe, and the mountain and sea realm was no longer a secret, there was no harm in telling him about it. After listening to this, Jean Camlin was stunned. After half a minute, he asked with his eyes wide open, "The human world is like this?" I sighed and nodded. Jean Camlin's face was still filled with shock, and he kept repeating, "How could this be? How could this be?" After a few minutes of digesting the information, Jean Canwin's expression finally recovered a bit. He seemed to have accepted the current situation and didn't ask any more questions about the mountain and sea realm. Instead, he told me about the appearance of the monster that had taken Little Wang Li. He also told me that the monster had deliberately taken Little Wang Li away for a reason. From that, it seemed that Little Wang Li's life wasn't in any danger for the time being. His analysis was the same as mine. Of course, all of this was just our conjecture. Things like monsters can't necessarily be judged by common sense. Just in case, we had to find the monster's whereabouts as soon as possible. I sent out my spiritual sense to search the area and found that the wild and ancient energy here wasn't very strong. However, I was surrounded by a dense forest, so it would be very difficult to search bit by bit. Fortunately, my spiritual sense could cover a very wide area, and the dense forest wasn't a hindrance to me. After a while, I found a strange place. After sweeping it with my spiritual sense, I couldn't go through it, but I could faintly sense a weak energy fluctuation. After memorizing the location, I continued to search. Soon, I had searched the surrounding 50 kilometers. Apart from finding a few more monsters with cultivation bases below the Heavenly Master level, I didn't find anything else out of the ordinary. Thus, I took Fatty and Jean Canwin with me to the place where I had first discovered the strange place. The three of us flew through the air and soon arrived. After landing, I wasn't in a hurry to enter. Instead, I carefully observed my surroundings and quickly discovered that there was a restriction here. Previously, my spiritual sense hadn't been able to go through this place because of this restriction. Since there was a restriction here, there must be a whole other world inside. It was highly likely that Little Wang Li and a monster were inside this restriction. Given my current cultivation base, I naturally didn't care about the monster. However, I was worried about Little Wang Li's safety, so I didn't dare to break the restriction by force. After thinking for a moment, I asked Fatty if he could break the restriction. Hearing my question, Fatty observed the restriction for a while and nodded. I can give it a try. I should have a 50 to 60% chance of success. It was worth a try if there was a 50% chance. Thus, I nodded and asked Fatty to act as soon as possible. While the Fatty was fiddling with the formation, I told Jean Canwin to stay outside with the Fatty after the formation was broken. On one hand, the situation inside was unclear, and their cultivation bases were slightly low. If there was an emergency, I might not be able to take care of them. On the other hand, I had to leave someone outside to prevent other situations from happening. Jean Canwin was also a person who cared about the overall situation. After listening to my arrangements, he nodded without hesitation. He only told me to be careful. Just as I finished speaking, I heard Fatty exclaim, "It's done." I turned to look and saw that there was a gap in the restriction. Fatty's restriction breaking method was indeed extraordinary. He didn't directly break the restriction, but instead created a gap in it. This way, he could ensure that he wouldn't alert the enemy. At that moment, there was an extremely dense, ancient, savage aura coming from the gap in the restriction. Seeing this, I reacted. No wonder the ancient savage aura wasn't that dense. It was most likely that the monster had gathered all the ancient savage aura in the surroundings here for its own cultivation. I slightly frowned. Previously, when I saw the restriction, I guessed that the monster's cultivation base shouldn't be too high. However, from the density of the ancient savage aura, I didn't dare to be so sure. Time was of the essence, so I didn't have much time to think about it. Since I was going in alone, even if the monster's cultivation base was higher than Rush and I couldn't defeat it, I could at least protect myself. As for the Rush Great Monster, it wouldn't appear so easily. As I thought about this, I leaped into the hole. After landing, I hid my aura and carefully took a few steps forward. Then, I stopped and started to check the surroundings. This place was a cliff. There wasn't even a blade of grass growing in the surroundings. The dense, ancient, savage aura was mixed with a fishy smell. Once the fishy smell entered my nose, it made my head feel heavy. I held my breath and sensed a trace of energy coming from the bottom of the cliff. As far as I could see, although the surroundings were desolate, there was a dense forest under the cliff. The monster should be hiding in the forest. To be cautious, I didn't fly over. Instead, I followed the small path behind the cliff and entered the forest. After searching for a while, I quickly discovered the existence of a monster in front of me. The monster's appearance was exactly the same as what Jean Canwin had described. It looked extremely strange. Its torso was no different from a human's. Only the few antennae on its head revealed its identity as a monster. Although its appearance matched Jean Canwin's description, I didn't sense little Wang Li's aura around it. Thus, I couldn't determine that it was the monster that had kidnapped little Wang Li. Judging from its aura, the monster's cultivation base shouldn't be higher than Rush Great Monster. I originally planned to capture it and interrogate it. However, the monster seemed to be in a hurry to rush somewhere. At the moment, I didn't know how many monsters there were. If I suddenly attacked, it would be fine if I could successfully capture the monster. However, if it struggled and caused a commotion, it would expose my whereabouts. That wouldn't be good. After weighing the pros and cons in my mind, I decided to follow the monster to see where it was rushing to. I didn't dare to get too close, so I followed it from a distance. After walking for a quarter of an hour, the monster finally stopped in front of a cave. However, it didn't immediately enter the cave. Instead, it suddenly turned around and looked behind it. I immediately bent down in the grass to look. The monster stood in its original position. After a few seconds, it turned around and entered the cave. I heaved a sigh of relief and quickly followed. Chapter 883. In an instant, I reacted. That monster had not only captured little Wang Li, but also many other children. I couldn't help but feel angry. Although I didn't know why the monster had captured the children, it obviously wasn't anything good. After the monster beast entered the cave, I waited for another half a minute before stealthily making my way to the entrance of the cave. Originally, I planned to rush into the cave to rescue the children, but the situation inside the cave was unknown. It wasn't appropriate to rush in like this. While I was thinking, the monster that had gone in earlier came out again. I quickly hid in the bushes at the side and retracted my aura before looking over. At this time, the monster was carrying a child of about 2 or 3 years old. The child was constantly crying, but the monster didn't care. After coming out of the cave, it quickly left in the direction it had come from. I furrowed my eyebrows. The monster had taken the child away, and it was very likely that it wanted to harm his life. If I dealt with it, it shouldn't be a big problem, but if I acted rashly and alerted the monster, the other children in the cave might not be saved. While I was hesitating, there was a sudden rustling sound behind me. I quickly turned my head and saw a figure rushing towards the cave from the corner of my eye. Before I could react, he had already entered the cave. In a hurry, I couldn't see the person's appearance clearly. I could only tell from his figure and behavior that he should be a human. Could it be that he had also come for the children in the cave? At this time, the monster from before had already disappeared, so I didn't have much to think about. After thinking for a while, I also followed him into the cave. The cave was quite cold, and there were drops of water constantly seeping out from the stone walls on both sides. The children must have suffered a lot since they had been locked up here. Since entering the cave, the crying sounds had become louder. I felt a little anxious, and my footsteps couldn't help but quicken. Unexpectedly, before I could go far, a black shadow suddenly flashed in front of me. Before I could react, a sharp object was pressed against my throat. Everything happened very quickly. Just as I was about to move, the black shadow in front of me suddenly shouted my name. "Brother Joe, why are you here? Recognize me?" His voice sounded familiar. However, the cave was pitch black, and he had used some kind of spell to hide his body. I couldn't recognize him right away. Seeing that I didn't respond, the man paused for a moment before saying, "I'm Sukuin." "Sukuin? How could it be him? He's an old acquaintance of mine. I met him during the Phoenix fledgling assembly of the Metaphysics Society. Although we haven't had much interaction, I've seen him whenever the Metaphysics Society is involved. That includes the time when the mountain and sea realm was opened, when he was in control of the Eastern Emperor Bell. Since he was an acquaintance, I was much less vigilant. He put away his weapon and asked me if I had come here for the children. I nodded and didn't dare to raise my voice. I told him my purpose for coming here. After listening to my story, he also sent me a telepathic message, telling me that he had discovered that someone had kidnapped a child a few days ago. After searching for a while, he had found this place. Moreover, he had arrived earlier than me and had already discovered something. According to him, there were dozens of demonic beasts here, and there was no lack of young spirit cultivators. Among the dozens of demonic beasts, there was a commander. Although he hadn't seen him before, he estimated that the commander's cultivation base was above Chongyang. This was also the reason why he had been hiding in the dark to rescue the children. As for the reason why the demonic beasts had kidnapped the children, he speculated that it was to increase their cultivation base. However, all of this was still speculation. For the time being, he hadn't figured out the connection between the children and increasing their cultivation base. After communicating with each other, we found out that our goal was the same. Naturally, we joined hands and moved forward together. Before long, we arrived at the place where the children were imprisoned. Contrary to my previous speculation, there were dozens of kidnapped children, both boys and girls. Judging from their appearances, they should all be under the age of school. They were clearly frightened. When they saw us, their cries became louder. At the same time, they retreated, their eyes filled with fear. I felt sorry for them and quickly comforted them. Children, don't be afraid. We're here to save you. As I said that, I looked around and quickly found little Wang Li. He was almost 4 years old, and his body was much stronger than when he was young. He was lying on the ground with his eyes closed, motionless. I couldn't help but feel nervous. I quickly walked over to check on him. When I found that he was only asleep, I heaved a sigh of relief. I reached out and patted his cheek, calling him a few times. Wang Li quickly opened his eyes. When he saw that it was me, he smiled and said in a childish voice, "Martial uncle, you're finally here. Where's my master?" This kid seemed to be able to handle things calmly. It seemed that Zhang Kanwen had taught him well. After confirming that little Wang Li was fine, I felt much more relaxed. However, when I turned to look at the other dozens of children, I was in a dilemma. It wouldn't be a problem to take little Wang Li away, but it would be tricky to take so many children away at the same time. Firstly, this place was far from the exit. Secondly, there were many demonic beasts here. It was impossible to move fast with so many people. It was inevitable that we would bump into them. If that happened, we wouldn't be able to hide our tracks. At this moment, I missed the fatty. If he was here, he could use the monster refining gourd to suck the children in. It would save us a lot of trouble. As I was thinking about this, Su Kuan asked me if I had any way to take the children away. I wanted to ask him, but since he had asked, it was obvious that he didn't have any good ideas. Feeling helpless, I thought for a while and decided to inform the fatty to come over. Although it would be dangerous for him to come here, it would be less dangerous than us leaving with these children. After hearing my plan, Su Kuan nodded in agreement. I took out the sound-transmitting talisman and sent a message to the fatty. However, to my surprise, the sound-transmitting talisman seemed to be blocked by something. I couldn't send a message out. I tried to send a message to Zhang Kanwen, but the result was the same. There was no other way. Su Kuan and I discussed it again. We decided to let him stay here to protect the children. I would leave for a while and bring the fatty here. Before leaving, I wanted to take little Wang Li away, but after thinking about it, I felt that it wasn't appropriate. After all, Su Kuan was still here. If I took Wang Li away alone, it would be unfair to the other children. Secondly, it would make Su Kuan suspicious. After all, we didn't have a deep relationship, so there was no need to create a misunderstanding. Thus, I left little Wang Li behind and carefully left the cave alone, heading back to the entrance we had come from. Since I had concealed my cultivation base, the way back was peaceful. There were no traces of any demonic beasts. Around 15 minutes later, I arrived at the place where the restriction had been. However, when I stood still, I found that the gap in the restriction had disappeared. I then remembered that the fatty had told me that the restriction wasn't easy to deal with. He could only try his best to prevent the gap from disappearing. From the current situation, it seemed that his cultivation base couldn't support it. so he had to temporarily close the gap. This was troublesome. Although I could break the restriction by force, once I did so, the demonic beast here would notice. It would be troublesome to rescue the children. However, if I didn't break the restriction, the sound-transmitting talisman would be blocked, and I wouldn't be able to contact the fatty. How to take the children away would be a big problem. After thinking for a long time, I couldn't make a decision. I was stuck in a dilemma. While I was weighing the pros and cons, I suddenly felt an obvious energy fluctuation in the distant forest. I could also faintly hear the sounds of fighting. I was startled. Only Su Kuan and I were outsiders here. Could it be that Su Kuan had been discovered by the demonic beasts, and they were fighting? I didn't have time to think too much. I didn't care about the previous matter, so I turned around and followed the source of the energy fluctuation. Not long after, I reached a relatively open area in the forest and found Su Kuan's figure. It was just as I thought. Su Kuan was fighting with a demonic beast, but the children weren't here. Chapter 884. At that moment, Su Kuan was holding a long sword in his hand. The chi of the way was flowing on it, making it look bright and shiny. He performed a spell with one hand and formed a sword finger with the other, pressing it tightly against the hilt of the sword. In just a few seconds, the chi of the way on the long sword became stronger. As the chi of the sword moved, it stabbed straight at the demonic beast. The sword was extremely fast. In the blink of an eye, it arrived in front of the demonic beast. The demonic beast showed no fear. As it retreated, it spat out thick smoke from its mouth and charged straight at Su Kuan. The thick smoke seemed to be wrapped in pure energy, forcing Su Kuan to stop and dodge to the side. After Su Kuan dodged, the thick smoke fell to the ground in front of him. In an instant, a deep pit was formed in the ground, and the soil was scattered everywhere. Under the cover of the thick smoke, Su Kuan twisted his body and turned in another direction. Then, he thrust his sword forward again. The demonic beast was focused and did not let Su Kuan's sneak attack succeed. It used the same method as before and spat out thick smoke from its mouth again. I thought that Su Kuan would dodge again, but unexpectedly, he threw the long sword in his hand and performed a sword spell with both hands. The long sword that was thrown out spun rapidly in midair. Soon, it turned into a silver barrier. I had never seen this move of Su Kuan's. Since he was so confident, its power must be extraordinary. As expected, when the thick smoke hit the silver barrier, it was instantly dispersed by the chi of the way. Under the protection of the silver barrier, Su Kuan flew towards the demonic beast. When the demonic beast saw this, its expression froze. It raised its arms and shouted. Then, the demonic beast's aura surged. It spat out several clouds of smoke from its mouth, as if it wanted to break the silver barrier. Under the continuous attacks, Su Kuan did not seem to be feeling well. His face was slightly pale. It seemed that the previous move had consumed a lot of chi. When I saw this, I could not stand still. It was not that I was worried that Su Kuan would be defeated, but that I did not want to attract other demonic beasts. Just as I was about to step forward, I saw Su Kuan suddenly stop and stand still. His chi of the way flowed out of his body. Several phantoms appeared out of thin air and surrounded the demonic beast. Although with my cultivation, I could see through his real body with a single glance, the demonic beast didn't have the ability to do so. For a moment, he was in a mess, and like a headless fly, he tried to attack every single one of the phantoms. This was exactly what Su Kuan wanted. When the demonic beast showed an opening, his real body and the phantoms raised their swords at the same time and stabbed at the demonic beast. Ignoring its tail, the demonic beast's back was pierced through by Su Kuan's sword. The body of the demonic beast trembled violently when it suffered this attack, but it was also slightly ruthless. It disregarded its own injuries and determined the location of Su Kuan's true body by relying on the location of its injuries. After that, it suddenly turned around and smashed its fist towards Su Kuan's true body. His punch was powerful and was filled with hatred. If it hit, the punch, the fist, the Su punch, the Kuin's attack. However, Su Kuin did not panic at all. With a flash of his real body, he completed the alien form swap with a phantom. When the fist of the demonic beast hit him, it hit the phantom again. At the same time, Su Kuin's real body was behind the demonic beast and pierced through its back. After a few times, the demonic beast's heart was pierced through, and it could only struggle on its deathbed. I stood at the side and applauded Su Kuin's exquisite technique. Just when I thought that Su Kuin's victory was already in his grasp, the dying monster suddenly raised its head and fiercely pounded its chest, letting out an angry roar. Immediately after, the antennae on its head grew rapidly. A few seconds later, the antennae, which were originally only a few inches long, grew to a meter long. As the tentacles grew, the demonic beast's aura also rose. Its originally dark gray eyes turned scarlet. Although I did not know what secret technique the demonic beast used, it was obvious that the demonic beast that was in a frenzy was its strongest power. I glanced at Su Kuin's face. He didn't show any fear as he watched the demonic beast's actions. Instead, he seemed to be interested. I understood that he most likely had other techniques that he hadn't used yet. Thus, I didn't interrupt him and stood at the side. While I continued to watch the battle, I also spread out my spiritual sense to pay attention to the surrounding situation to prevent other demonic beasts from suddenly appearing. At that moment, the demonic beast moved. It twisted its neck, and the antennae on its head also rotated. After a while, it actually forced out a wave of air. This wave of air was no small matter, as it carried a foul stench. Even with my high cultivation, I still felt nauseous from a distance. One could only imagine how Su Kuin, who was standing nearby, felt as if he was about to vomit. As I had expected, Su Kuin immediately bent down and retched. However, after a short moment, his body suddenly emitted an intense golden light, instantly dispersing the stench. Then, the golden light became even denser, forcing me to squint my eyes even though I was standing in the distance. When I opened my eyes again, Su Kuin was holding an item in his hand. It was one of the 10 great divine tools that I had sent to Mount Lao, the Eastern Emperor Bell. When the mountain and sea realm opened, I knew that Su Kuin had the Eastern Emperor Bell, so I wasn't surprised to see him again. However, from his actions just now, it seemed that he had done the same thing as me and had hidden the divine tool within his body. I had stored the Xinyuan sword in my body using the sword-devouring incantation of the Tao of sword cultivators. Presumably, Su Kuin had also cultivated a similar technique. Looking at Su Kuin now, I felt a bit emotional. During the gathering of the Phoenix Chicks, my talent with 4 meridians was the best. Then, I competed with Lu Jinyang in the arena, attracting many people's attention. However, Su Kuin didn't attract much attention. Who would have thought that after so many years, not only would his cultivation not fall by much, but he would also have the Eastern Emperor Bell recognize him as its master. Even I clicked my tongue in wonder at his abilities. He could be called a dragon among men. Apart from him, Lu Jinyang, Han Wenan, and the others all had decent talent and achievements. That was why the 2 words, Young Phoenix, in the Young Phoenix Society seemed to be quite appropriate now. As I pondered, Su Kuin made his move. Dao Qi circulated around the Eastern Emperor Bell, and as he moved, it left his hand and fiercely smashed towards the demonic beast. The demonic beast seemed to have realized that the Eastern Emperor Bell was not ordinary. It lifted its leg and wanted to escape. However, the vast golden light surrounding the Eastern Emperor Bell had already enveloped its surroundings, locking it in place. There was no way for it to escape. This demonic beast was rather decisive. When it saw that it was unable to escape, it instantly changed its strategy. It waved the antennae on its head, and instead of retreating, it advanced directly towards the Eastern Emperor Bell, as if it wanted to fight to the death. Back at Billows Mountain, the evil spirit used the Eastern Emperor Bell to break through the restrictions of Billows Mountain. That was how we were able to escape. From this, it could be seen how powerful the Eastern Emperor Bell was. Although the demonic beast had the determination to fight to the death, it had chosen the wrong target. In the instant that its feelers collided with the Eastern Emperor bell, a bell chime sounded. Soon after, the surrounding air seemed to shatter from the sound of the bell, and blurry ripples spread out. As for the demonic beast, it directly turned into dust and dissipated. Not even a trace of ashes was left. It was the first time I had seen such a remarkable power. It was most likely a new technique that was activated after the divine weapon recognized its master. After the matter was over, the Eastern Emperor bell returned to Su Kuan's body. The golden light also retracted, and not a single trace was revealed. On the surrounding ground, even the scars that were left from the previous battle were completely hidden by the sound of the bell. Looking at this scene, I couldn't help but exclaim in my heart. The Eastern Emperor bell was indeed the top of the 10 divine weapons. Its power made even me palpitate. When I looked at Su Kuan again, although he only had the cultivation of Yang spirit, in my eyes, I already saw him as someone of the same level. However, although the power of the Eastern Emperor bell was great, it wasn't easy to control it. At that moment, Su Kuan didn't have the excitement that he had after killing the demonic beast. Instead, his face was as pale as paper, and he sat paralyzed on the ground, gasping for breath. At that moment, I walked out from the side. Although Su Kuan was exhausted, he still maintained his vigilance. He immediately looked at me. When he saw that it was me, he heaved a sigh of relief and revealed a smile. He opened his mouth as if he wanted to say something, but he couldn't make a sound. I knew that he was exhausted, so I extended my hand and patted his shoulder, indicating that he shouldn't be anxious. I took the opportunity to send spiritual power into his body to help him heal. After a while, Su Kuan recovered a little. Without waiting for his recovery, he anxiously said to me, "Brother Zhou, go and take a look at those children. I feel that something is wrong." I frowned and stopped what I was doing. I quickly asked him what had happened. Su Kuan didn't immediately reply, and instead pulled me back to the cave. Seeing his anxious expression, I didn't dare to be negligent. I pulled him and dashed toward the cave. When we were halfway to the cave, I spread out my spiritual sense to check from afar, but I couldn't find the aura of those children in the cave. I was a little flustered and stopped. After I told Su Kuan about the situation, I asked him what had happened. Su Kuan's expression also became gloomy. He said, "Not long after you left, I sensed that a monster was coming to the cave. I was worried that more children would be killed, so I came out of the cave and tried to lure the monster away. That was the reason for the previous bitter battle. Not long after I fought with the monster, I noticed that a wisp of smoke seemed to be drifting out of the cave and flying into the distance. At that time, I had my suspicions, but I was entangled by the monster and couldn't get away. Moreover, I had already lured the monster far away, so I couldn't rush over. The disappearance of all the children was most likely related to that wisp of smoke. Little Wang, Li was also among those children. Listening to Su Kuan's story, I was also extremely worried. After he finished, I spread out my spiritual sense to search for them. But after a while, I had already spread out my spiritual sense to the limit. Apart from finding traces of countless monsters, I couldn't find any children. After remaining silent for a moment, I made a decision and hastily told Su Kuan, "Let's go and find a monster to see if we can find any information." After hearing what I said, Su Kuan nodded. He didn't care about the injuries on his body, as he quickly followed me towards the nearest monster. After a while, we arrived in front of the monster. The monster only had the cultivation of a seal and was sleeping soundly on the ground. Due to the difference in cultivation, it didn't discover anything after we landed. It only woke up when I reached out to grab it. But after seeing me and Su Kuan, it didn't show any fear. Instead, greed appeared in its eyes, and its mouth moved as if it wanted to devour us. Because I was worried about little Wang, Li, and the children, I didn't dare to delay. I activated the true power in my body and instantly entered the monster's body to kill it. Afterwards, I didn't stop and used the soul-searching technique to extract all of its memories. After skimming through them, I understood. The group of monsters gathered here belonged to the same tribe. Most of them had been affected by the savage, ancient chi after the mountain and sea realm had opened, and had become monsters. However, they were different from the other scattered monsters. Among them, there was a leader. It was a monster from the mountain and sea realm, and it was because of this leader that so many monsters had gathered together to cause chaos. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.